It all started in a completely ruined world, where our hero, and what was left of humanity, had to fight monsters just to survive. He had his sword ready when a next beast came at him, but he was so fast that he sliced the grotesque creature in half with just a flick of his wrist. He looked so fearless that even fate seemed to respect him. Months went by with him locked in brutal battles, always coming out on top. 10 years passed before he knew it, gone in the blink of an eye. What had he turned into? That he could wipe out every monster with just a swing of his sword. But then, one day, someone or something showed up out of nowhere, blocking his path. This newcomer was so cruel and powerful, he could have been mistaken for a demon god. The dark energy was overwhelming, and even though so many believed in him, our hero was suddenly up against a monster so strong that he had no choice but to fight for his life. The huge villain told him to surrender, saying there was nothing left anyway, since the world as he knew it was already gone. That's when a question started to echo in his mind. Who's really behind all this pain? Who caused this disaster in the first place? The monster actually told him not to waste his talent and just become his sword, a pretty ridiculous thing for a creature like that to say. Still, the hero was ready for another round, even though he took some nasty hits from the monster's non-stop attacks. He tried every trick he knew, but nothing worked. The monster treated him like he was nothing, sending him flying with a single punch. Still, our hero wasn't about to give up. He pushed himself back up, determined as ever, but got slammed into the ground again. This time, he was so beaten down he could barely move. The monster was unlike anything he'd ever faced before. Then, he spotted a glowing pendant around the monster's neck, strangely beautiful, especially compared to its owner, and shining with an odd light. Even though the pain was unbearable, the hero forced himself to stand and, with everything he had, leapt into the air and drove his sword at the monster's chest. The beast knocked him aside again, but this time the pendant shattered. Suddenly, the monster looked both furious and terrified. He called the hero a bastard as he started to fade away, screaming, "Stop it!" before finally disappearing into a blinding light. Barely holding on, the hero just lay there, his armor stained with blood, staring up at the sky, because honestly, it was a beautiful sight. As that sky's glow spread across the world, the scene shifted. Now a young man was walking through a peaceful, modern city. He soon reached a huge sign. Namsen Class C Gate. No civilians allowed. Only heroes could scan in with their registration cards and IDs. When he tried, though, the system flagged him as a civilian, so technically he shouldn't have gone any further. But this guy was in Seoul's Yongsan district, and he moved fast. So fast he hopped the gate like sneaking into high-security places was just a regular thing for him. Suddenly, alarms started blaring, warning everyone that someone unregistered had broken in. Pretty soon, heroes and agents would be swarming the place, trying to stop him before he caused any trouble or got himself hurt. He slipped away from the noise, soon surrounded by trees and quiet, with nobody around. Out of nowhere, somebody shouted at him to stop. For heroes showed up, all built differently but dressed in the same uniform, and confronted him. They asked, half mocking, if he was lost or something, acting like they knew better. They said they were about to leave and offer to help, even though they had no idea who he was or if he even wanted help. He just looked like a normal guy, not a hero, nothing special about him except maybe his curiosity. The only woman in the group pointed out that he wasn't wearing their uniform, so he couldn't be a hero. Another guy guessed maybe he was a porter, but even that seemed weird, so they started eyeing his backpack, wondering what was in it. It was just a regular backpack. Someone joked maybe he was a bag carrier who'd been ditched by other heroes. But even if that were true, how was he still here and not already monster food? The young man got what they were hinting at, but said he'd just arrived and didn't know what all the fuss was about. "See? Told you he got ditched," one of the group said, sounding sure he'd figured it out. But the oldest-looking guy had a different take. He said he'd seen plenty like him before and probably knew what was running through his mind when he snuck in. Still, he warned, coming into a gate because of a social media trend or some TV dare was basically suicide, especially at a C-rank gate. He said if you wanted to try, you should at least start with an F-rank one. Surprisingly, the young man answered that he understood the warning, but honestly, he couldn't say thank you. The group was pretty shocked at the attitude from such a skinny kid. One of them even muttered, "What kind of crazy guy is this?" But their leader calmed everyone down, deciding not to pick a fight. He figured, hey, if this guy was nuts enough to ignore advice, maybe he'd just have to learn things the hard way. The young man strolled away, not caring what they were saying behind his back. It just didn't matter. The leader let him go, thinking he was stubborn enough to need a reality check. The young man was determined, even if the others said he had no idea what a real gate was like compared to what he'd seen on TV. Out of nowhere, a huge monster appeared, trying to taunt him. The creature was terrifying, with tusks by its mouth, but the young man just calmly took off his backpack and spun it around like he had some trick up his sleeve. The monster didn't have a clue. It lunged at him, but he dodged with barely any effort, looking almost bored. He'd waited 10 years for this moment, and his eyes flashed yellow just thinking about it. Hard to believe, but it was finally time. Showtime. He moved so fast the monster didn't even see it coming. The young man landed a punch so powerful that the monster's massive head was gone in an instant. The beast crashed to the ground, drowning in its own blood, defeated in a way it never thought possible. The young man just said, "Nothing feels different," meaning he brought all his power with him into this new adventure. The young man walked over to the monster's lifeless body to check out what was left, reaching down to pick something up. He found a beautifully crafted weapon, once the monster's, now his, and took a moment to really look it over, admiring the craftsmanship from every angle. But then, something weird caught his eye. He glanced at the monster's neck, where its head had been not long ago, and noticed the beast's inside seemed to be burning in slow, swirling circles, like some kind of strange embers. Blood was splattered everywhere, painting the place red. The protagonist plunged the sword into the monster's huge body, digging out a jewel-like heart from its chest. A heart so shiny and bright you might mistake it for a ruby. Turns out, it was just a low-grade magic stone. Back in the day, the hero wouldn't have looked twice at something so basic, but times have changed. He tossed the magic stone into his backpack, and as he was wrapping up and stashing his stuff, something else caught his attention. His bright yellow eyes narrowed when he heard footsteps, or actually, the sound of heavy paws getting closer and closer to where he was sitting. A gang of wild, hungry beasts was closing in, clearly thinking dinner was served. "Not so fast, sweethearts." The first monster lunged at him with a massive sword, but the young man was way too alert. He dodged easily, the sword missing him by a mile. Clutching the magic stone, he spun around and charged at them like a bullet. The monsters didn't stand a chance. They were way too slow. He crushed the first monster's head with one swift move and watched it drop. The other two just stared as he casually tossed his backpack aside, getting ready for round two. He looked so calm, determined, and focused that even the monsters had to be a little freaked out by his confidence. Meanwhile, the squad of suited-up heroes was still patrolling the camp, clearly not over their earlier run-in with him. The red-haired female warrior was the first to say what everyone was thinking. That boy from before. What if he actually ends up dead? One young soldier was baffled and blurted out, "Wait, are you actually worried about him?" But the leader chimed in, "If he's an intruder, then by now, agents from the control center should be on his tail." This was Namsing Gate, a C-rank area, so top-tier agents, B rank or higher, would be sent out. As long as he doesn't lose his mind and run straight into monsters, he'll survive. "No need to panic," the leader said, totally unaware of who they were really talking about. The others figured he was probably shaking in his boots right now. But actually, it was the monsters who were shaking, because right then, the main character threw a brutal punch straight into the face of one of the deformed beasts. He uppercut the first one, kept the second busy with his lightning moves, dodged attack after attack, waiting for the perfect moment. The giant with the tusks was furious, but the young man, in his everyday clothes, was ready for something special. He lifted his foot high and brought it crashing down on the monster's head. The creature howled in pain and hit the dirt hard. When the dust and smoke cleared, the bodies of the once terrifying monsters were just lying there, lifeless. The main character picked up one of their weapons and headed for the loot. And, unsurprisingly, he went straight for the prize. 3 more magic stones to add to his growing stash. By now, his backpack was about to burst from all the treasures he'd collected. Just then, an agent showed up, searching for the intruder. But the young man didn't even bother to look back, too busy thinking about his haul, which still wasn't enough, since he only had 12 low-grade and 16 lower-mid-grade stones. The agent spotted him and called for backup. The protagonist finally turned around to see what was happening. 4 agents closed in instantly, one of them announcing they were from the gate control center and demanding his hero registration ID. If he didn't have one, he'd have to come with them. The young man was clearly not thrilled about this, and the main agent, who looked kind of scary, said he'd better cooperate. He was seriously annoyed by these guys, and he didn't bother hiding it. The agents pulled out their handcuffs, still trying to get him to comply. One warned that if he didn't cooperate, they have to use force. One of them grabbed his wrist, holding on like he'd never let go, and warned he might get hurt if he resisted. But the young man wasn't having it. He twisted the agent's wrist without hesitation. The guy's eyes went wide with shock. The protagonist shot back, saying they should let go and stop bothering him, and that they should really believe him when he said it would be better for everyone. The rest of the agents were stunned by his quick move, but immediately drew their weapons, waiting for a chance to strike. Our hero only glanced at their weapon, reviewing in his mind, rank 4 magic seal, something that might work on orcs but not on him. That's when he slammed the unlucky agent to the ground like it was nothing, then gave them a final warning. If you don't want to get hurt, just go back. The hero just stood there casually and looking smug. His cocky attitude made him an easy target for the agents. They rushed at him with their weapons, but since those weren't even sharp, the protagonist easily blocked them with his hands. One of the agents tried to kick him, but the boy didn't even flinch and the attack bounced right off. Then, a younger guy tried to sweep him off his feet with a sudden kick. The main character just flicked his leg, and the guy went flying to the side, losing his balance and landing a few steps away. The next agent got a solid kick from the hero's foot and was sent flying into the distance. Agent number 3 was clearly intimidated by the hero's powerful moves and didn't want to be the next one to get hit. He grumbled angrily, frustrated that all these top-level agents were getting wrecked by some kid. But the protagonist didn't seem bothered at all by the angry faces around him. Then, out of nowhere, the main character just vanished. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. Cold sweat dripped down the agent's face as he tried to figure out what had happened. Did he really disappear? Suddenly, the young man reappeared and landed a punch so hard that the agent could only cry out in pain. The agent nearly collapsed to his knees, unintentionally bowing to him. Shocked and defeated, he shot the hero another angry glare. The protagonist then asked about registered heroes being able to move around the area freely. The agent answered, "They can do whatever they want as long as they don't break any laws inside the gate. We won't stop them." Curious and a bit bold, the hero asked about the rift zones, which made the agent even more nervous. Apparently, these were portals to other worlds where weird monsters appeared, and they've been popping up everywhere. People had started using the stuff they got from hunting monsters as new energy sources. That's why the government kept such tight control over the gates and the monsters inside. All this extra security was for those reasons. But the places that hadn't been turned into gates yet were called rift zones. Anything could be inside, total unknowns, and super dangerous. The hero realized he was in a tough spot. No matter which gate he went to, they'd just come after him. He pointed out that they'd probably accuse him of trespassing and wouldn't let him off easy. That's when the agent finally decided to be honest. If an unregistered hero goes into a gate without permission, the center gets notified right away, he explained. Then all nearby agents get sent out. He added that rift zones weren't as easy to access as gates, and the Hero Association wouldn't ignore that either. But the protagonist, still as chill as ever, just shrugged and said he didn't care about any of that. Right then, the agent's thoughts turned dark. He wished he'd reported this crazy guy to headquarters from the start. The main character was done talking and figured the agent could use a beating like the others. He tossed the agent aside like he was nothing. The agent crashed into the trees and bushes. The young man clearly had bigger things on his mind and couldn't be bothered by some low-level agent in his way. As the protagonist walked away, the agent grumbled and called him a bastard. The young man, cool as ever, just replied that he'd kill him if he ever saw him again. The scene shifted to the sky, and memories started flooding back. The memory of the last thing he could recall before being reborn in this new body. The moment he defeated that overpowered creature, sacrificing his own life in the process. Still clad in shining armor, he felt his consciousness slipping away, as if he were being drawn into some vast unknown. For a fleeting instant, he welcomed the peace that came with letting go. Yet, it wasn't tranquility that awaited him, but rather the cold certainty of death, pulling him toward a strange and unfamiliar place. For the hero, it felt like the end, making his once invincible body now looks powerless. As he drifted upward, something unexpected happened. He opened his eyes to see a young man standing before him, dressed not in armor, but in ordinary clothes. Puzzled, he asked who the man was, and the black-haired stranger introduced himself as Sayo Dojin, and with a somber expression, revealed that he too was on the brink of death. Gazing up at this handsome stranger, The hero was caught off guard when Dojin made an unusual request, especially given the circumstances. If you help me out, I'll just disappear quietly. Still disoriented and suspended in the void, the hero refused without hesitation, not even waiting to hear what Dojin truly wanted. Disappointment flickered across Dojin's face as the hero continued, explaining that he no longer had anything to live for. After fighting for years, I was betrayed by someone I trusted. My country is gone. My family is gone. My friends are gone. You understand what I mean, don't you? It seemed they both carried heavy burdens of sorrow. But unlike the hero, Dojin still had people he cared about, his grandmother and his younger sister. The thought of their suffering was almost unbearable for him. The hero let out a weary sigh and said, "How ridiculous it is that we're willing to sacrifice everything for love, yet the greatest sacrifice is simply to keep living." Finally, his curiosity piqued. The hero asked what Dojin truly wanted. The question seemed to lift Dojin's spirits, a faint hope brightening his expression. But what exactly was this mysterious request? Whatever it was probably the reason our hero decided to continue living in the Dojin body. The scene shifted again, this time to the blue sky over the Gazan Digital Complex in Jumchungu, Seoul. There were now more shops trading gate byproducts than IT companies. Crowds bustled through the streets as Dojin headed to a building. He found a nearly empty shop that fit his plans and went inside. The shopkeeper was a young guy with tattoos and a laid-back attitude. The young man said he was there to sell some mana stones. The shopkeeper started bragging about his services, but when Dojin dumped a pile of magical stones on the counter, he was stunned by how many there were. It was wild. The young man didn't care about the blood left on the jewels at all, just carrying them around like it was nothing. Trying to stay cool, the shopkeeper started sorting them and even offered the young man some coffee. 12 low-grade mana stones, 16 mid-low grade, and 5 high-low grade, he said after counting. The commission's 40%, so you'll get 5.46 million won. The protagonist was annoyed about the 40% cut since he'd done all the work, but the shopkeeper just shrugged and said they usually took 45%, and if he didn't want to sell, he could take them back. So the young man did just that, packing the stones up, but the shopkeeper said he still owed 300,000 won for sorting and 10,000 for the coffee. The young man replied he didn't have that kind of cash and told him to come get it if he really wanted. The seller said they had a few C-rank heroes backing them up if he refused to pay. He even insulted the protagonist. And just then, some huge guys walked in. They were the C-rank heroes he mentioned. They looked so cold and tough, it was almost like they were on something. When the big guy first locked eyes with Dojin, he only wanted to demonstrate how strong he was and that Dojin should cooperate, unaware of what a monster this little guy actually was, and he shouldn't just mess with him. Moments later, inside the stone exchange shop, the poor shopkeeper looked terrified, like he'd seen a beast or maybe something even scarier. The muscled-up man, who was at least twice the size of a normal person, was flying towards him. As expected, it was actually the hero's own powerful fist that slammed him down and flattened him right onto the floor. The crazy part? He wasn't the only one. All his buddies had already been dealt with just as easily, like they were rookie fighters instead of C-rank heroes. Dojin started strolling over in his usual chill, too-cool-to-care way, heading for the shopkeeper, who was now hiding behind the counter and looking even more freaked out. He told the seller that a 1% commission was fair and jokingly added that he hoped things would go smoother the next time he stopped by, because he'd definitely be coming back. Hours later, on another location, he slammed a fat stack of cash down on the table. Two women, one older, one young, just stared, totally shocked by the amount. Grandma started poking through the bills and eyeing Dojin like she thought he'd robbed a bank or something. Dojin just scratched his neck and explained that a friend he'd loaned money to a while ago had finally paid him back after his business took off. Grandma still wasn't buying it and asked if he even had friends like that. But the young man reminded her about the neighborhood he grew up in and that, yeah, they used to hang out back then. That seemed to convince her, and she finally let go of her worries about where the money came from. Now, it was Yunying's turn to bombard him with questions. She grinned at her brother and asked if they were rich now. When he said yes, she was over the moon, dancing and running around their cozy room. Seeing her so happy, Dojin suddenly remembered the previous Dojin request, asking him to provide a safe place for his grandma and his little sister, Yunying. But before long, the vision faded, and he was back in the room, watching Yunying bounce around. He glanced in the mirror, staring at his own eyes. They looked different now. Ever since the bee-slaying hero woke up in this new world, he'd become Dojin. He was thinking about how the safest house in Korea cost about 110 billion won these days, and even though he didn't exactly owe anyone anything, he knew that if he got his strength back, that much money would be no big deal. Honestly, everything here, rifts, gates, monsters, just seemed weaker compared to his destroyed world. For someone who was a sword god, this place is like a playground, he thought. But still, not even a tenth of my old strength has come back yet. Suddenly, someone started yelling his name from outside. He told Grandma he'd go check it out, but she got nervous and asked him to stay inside. But Dojin wasn't the type to just sit and wait for things to happen. He opened the door and found two strangers on the porch, acting like he owed them a fortune. They were the classic weird-looking loan shark types. The first guy started counting on his fingers and somehow decided that Dojin owed them a whopping 48 million won. The protagonist knew these were the loan sharks the real Dojin had borrowed from before he died. The 5 million he'd borrowed for Grandma's hospital bills had ballooned to 10 times that in no time. The short guy, who seemed to be the boss, mentioned they knew about the cash he made from the gate and said he should start paying up like the contract said. He was still rambling about how it wasn't unfair when Dojin suddenly threw a bone-crushing punch at the big guy, sending him flying. The little loan shark was so stunned, he seemed to think he was the one who got punched. Dojin stood over him, towering like a crazy action hero, and pointed out that he'd already paid over 9 million won. So if anything, they owed him. The talkative guy tried to joke, asking if he was really Dojin, but the young man just snapped at him to tell his boss he'd be coming to pay a visit soon. Later, under the city's bright blue sky, people bustled about, shopping for all sorts of things. It was during this lively time that Dojin took his little sister out for a shopping trip. He let Yunying pick out anything that caught her eye, teddy bears, toys, dolls, whatever made her smile. She was so excited her eyes practically popped out of her head when Dojin told her they could get those now that they'd finished buying new clothes. It was like something had changed inside him. Now that he shared Dojin's memories, he felt new emotions. At least, he felt genuine care. The old Dojin had always been kind to Yunying, his half-sister. I'll still protect that part of him, he promised himself. Yunying brought over a tiny bunny doll that looked almost alive, but Dojin just grabbed a giant teddy bear instead and told her he meant it. She could get anything she wanted. She blushed, looking just like the doll she held. They went for lunch, and Yunying ordered her favorite food. They were eating when someone started calling out Dojin's name. It was a fancy-looking woman with her bodyguards, who walked over and commented that new clothes wouldn't really change Dojin. She then rudely asked who the girl was, and even managed to insult him, asking if he was as much trouble as his mother. Dojin and his sister just stared at the three arrogant people. Finally, Yunying asked the question on both their minds. Brother, who is this woman? Dojin tried to keep his cool, while the ugly lady smiled faintly and waited for a response. And Yunying, looking cute in her new clothes, just stared back at both. Finally, the woman broke the silence, asked the girl's name, and got a simple answer from her. Yunying. The woman immediately assumed she must be from the Yoon family, then started mocking her outfit, calling it pathetic, just like her mother. As if things weren't awkward enough, she turned to Dojin for confirmation, but he just pretended not hearing her words, while she kept poking at him for not responding. She was acting weirdly curious, like she sensed something different about this guy that she thought she knew. Receiving no answer from Dojin, she turned back to Yunying again, called her a brat, and threw out a question that was beyond harsh. Do you know what the word whore means? Dojin couldn't stand this anymore, decided it was time she learn a lesson she'd never forget. You're an ugly wench, like an orc, he shot back, making up for her nasty words. She was so shocked that he actually said that to her face, and even more stunned that he didn't seem to care at all. Clearly, this wasn't his first time dealing with this kind of abuse. Dojin had been born out of wedlock and grew up poor. When his mom died when he was 7, his biological dad finally took him in. For over a decade, he got nothing but discrimination and contempt, like he was born just to be mistreated. Once the legal wife had a son, Dojin was tossed aside again and ended up living with his grandma and a half-sibling he'd never met. The hero thought to himself, Dojin, how tough did you have to be to live through all that? He couldn't believe how the guy stayed strong with so much thrown at him. That was in the past, but now he has decided that everything is going to be different. It seemed that ugly woman actually was his stepsister, and in that time, Dojin looked her in the eye and called her out, saying that even after living together for 12 years, she still held a grudge against him. She was speechless, getting roasted as he listed off her flaws. Her face, her twisted personality, her not-so-bright mind, basically saying she was helpless. Her bodyguards just stood there with their jaws on the floor as he kept going, calling out her jealousy of prettier girls and her constant inferiority complex. Then he pointed to Yunying and said this little girl was already way better than her, because at least she actually cared about her brother's well-being. By now, the whole restaurant was staring as he practically shouted these last words. He locked eyes with the woman, totally fearless, while she tried to fire back, mostly just shouting and demanding to know how he dared to say all that. That's when another woman walked in, looking much better than this loudmouth. To everyone's surprise, the abusive woman ran to her, crying "Mom," and tried to hug her. Even with tears rolling and tattling on Dojin, her mom shut her down and told her to cut out the drama, blaming her for her uncultured behavior. She turned to Dojin with a wide, fake smile, greeting him and inviting him over in a friendly tone. But the hero knew what she was really like, the one who'd made his life miserable for 12 years. Still smiling, she said, "Your father worries about you so much, too." But Dojin cut her off, saying how sick he was of hearing that. He made it clear they weren't close, and there was no point pretending otherwise. Then, blunt as ever, he told her to get lost. She was so thrown off, she finally dropped the act and stormed out of the restaurant. As she left, she couldn't help but wonder if this was really the same Dojin, the kid who used to keep his head down even when slapped for no reason. The other orange-haired woman hurried after her mom, with the bodyguards close behind. Dojin watched them go, then calmly told Yunying to leave with him. He thought to himself, the Dojin who stayed quiet while being pushed around is gone. It's in their best interest to figure that out sooner rather than later. The following night, in that area, a luxury car cruised down the road, carrying Dojin's stepmom and stepsister. The ugly girl asked her mom why they just left and didn't crush that bastard, fuming about his harsh comeback. Her mom didn't even blink. She just turned to one of her suited bodyguards and asked, "Why is Dojin still alive?" She said it so coldly, the poor guy just scratched his neck and answered that. Last he heard, Kong Chul had left Dojin inside the rift zone, so he's supposed to be dead. The woman exploded, yelling at him, clearly baffled that Dojin was still breathing. Her bodyguard could only apologize and promise not to disappoint her again, but her daughter was shocked. He was supposed to die? "Mom, what are you saying?" Her mother just leaned back and kept quiet, but her daughter wouldn't let it go, pressing for answers about whether she'd really tried to kill Dojin. Finally, her mom snapped, "Do you still have feeling for Dojin?" That shut her up. All she could do was deny everything, warning what if Grandpa or Dad found out about this. But her mom put a hand over her mouth and told her to stay out of it and let her personally take care of things. As they got closer to their house, the mother silently made a promise. One way or another, Dojin would pay for today's rude behavior and for daring to exist, repeating with herself, "No matter what, I will make you disappear." 10 years ago, the rift zones first appeared, mysterious portals that whisked people away to realms unknown. And from those rifts, monsters of every shape and size began pouring into our world, killing people in ways no one could have imagined. The world was thrown into chaos. But not long after that, out of the madness, emerged heroes, brave warriors who faced down the creatures and turned the tide. But soon, that chaos found a new direction when people discovered magic stones inside the monsters, and only then everything started to change. Now, on a sunny day in the city, a taxi wound its way through the busy city streets, carrying a man who knew more about those stones than most, and that man was none other than Dojin. He already knew, as these magic stones replaced the world's old energy sources, countries everywhere scrambled to turn rifts into regulated gates. Therefore, every industry seemed to revolve around these gates and the heroes who ventured through them. In other words, if anyone wanted to make real money, they had to become a hero. The taxi finally pulled up to its destination, and Dojin stepped out, immediately dwarfed by the towering skyscrapers around him. Soon, he found himself in Yongdongpo, at the capital headquarters of HCS. Walking up to a modest two-story building, he took his time, moving calmly toward whatever awaited him inside. There, a mysterious middle-aged man was enjoying a cigarette. What a warm welcome, Dojin thought with a smirk. Behind the man stood two loan sharks from before, their faces marked by obvious stitches. Their boss eyed Dojin up and down and growled, "Who the hell are you?" The boss stubbed out his half-smoked cigar on the table and sneered, "So you mess with my men and then show up here? You got guts." Dojin slipped into diplomat mode, explaining, perhaps a bit too reasonably, how he actually felt more at a loss the more he thought about the situation. The boss, caught off guard by Dojin's calm, pressed for clarification with a demanding tone, but Dojin didn't even blink. Instead, he declared, "I think I deserve some compensation, mental, physical, and material, for all the damage you've caused me." The boss was momentarily stunned by Dojin's attitude, but soon enough, you could see the gears turning behind those sunglasses. He realized the once docile kid had changed, and the way he'd handled the loan sharks made it clear. In his opinion, Dojin had awakened in the gate. Still, the boss didn't want to lose upper hand and approached Dojin and said, "Looks like you're feeling confident. Want to know what happened to the last cocky kid who bragged about awakening?" Just then, the door swung open. A squad of muscle-bound thugs stomped in, glaring down at Dojin with all the subtlety of a bad mafia movie. Shrugging on his coat, the boss continued threatening Dojin again, boasting that all the other hotshots before him had been D-rank trashes, and these guys were a few of his own D-rank fighters. Dojin, unfazed, waited patiently, as if he was genuinely curious to see just how far human foolishness would go, before finally coming to a conclusion. He had enough of this and asked the boss man to sit down, warning him with scary face that he's not finished talking yet. That's when a thug, probably the size of a gorilla, lunged at Dojin, but he was hopelessly slow for someone like our protagonist. As the brute closed in, Dojin snatched the man's glasses, tossed them aside, and landed a punch so fast and hard that the room fell silent for a few moments. The attacker slid to the floor, out cold, and left everyone shocked. Without missing a beat, Dojin started asking questions, even as he dismantled the next opponent. He wondered aloud what other shady businesses they ran besides loan sharking. As the third guy got punched hard enough to make his nose bleed, Dojin revealed his real goal, getting a hero ID. Another D-rank tried to attack from his blind spot, but Dojin dodged and took down the big guy with a lightning-fast finish. With all the muscle napping on the floor, Dojin turned to the boss and demanded a flawless hero ID by tomorrow, making sure the terrified, sweaty man understood he wasn't joking. The two bullies Dojin had beaten up days before just stood there, stunned. They didn't have the guts to face him for a second time. Only thing they could do was whispering, "What the hell just happened?" The boss tried to make sense of it all, mumbling, "He's not D-rank. Maybe C? No. Could he be B-rank?" Just then Dojin cut his thoughts and pressed for an answer, and the once bully boss snapped to attention, switching to full respect mode and promising to deliver. Then Dojin stepped closer, making the boss feel even more nervous than before. "Did Hong Heiju tell you to kill me?" The question hit the boss hard, immediately remembering the person he was talking about, his stepmother. At first, the boss wouldn't answer, until Dojin tightened his grip on the man's collarbone, making him scream. Finally, the truth came spilling out. Yes, it was that woman behind the attempt. As his men were watching, he revealed she was the one who wanted Dojin buried in debt, desperate enough to end his own life. Dojin fell silent, deep in thought, while the boss begged him to let go. With a shove, Dojin sent the man sprawling to the floor as the pieces clicked into place. They'd trapped him in the gate, hoping he'd have no choice but suicide, never imagining he could survive. The boss, nerves frayed, tried to defend himself. He swore with a shaky voice that he knew nothing about trapping Dojin in the gate. After all, he wouldn't get his money that way. For a moment, Dojin considered this, but suddenly the name Kong Chulwo coming to mind, the one who dragged him into the gate. Calmly, he ordered the boss to find every information he could about that person Kong by tomorrow. After that, our guy casually stepped out of the office. Now littered with groaning fighters, Dojin squinted into the bright sunlight. The day felt wide open, filled with possibilities, some of them darker than others. In that moment, the real Dojin's wish echoed in his mind. Please let Grandma and Yuanying live in the safest home there is. Dojin couldn't help but be amused by the real Dojin's simple hope. It sparked new ideas about how to use this life and what he might do with that wish. The next day, Dojin found himself holding a brand new hero registration ID, complete with his own photo and a neatly printed B-rank shining on the card. He gave it a once-over, a little amused at how official it looked for something so obviously forged. With a confident swipe, he pressed the card to the registration device at the gate. He couldn't help but smirk, half expecting something to go wrong, but the robotic voice chimed in, "Hero registration ID verified." Success. Then, as if determined to ruin the moment, the gate's speaker blared, "Warning, your level is below the recommended grade. Please use extreme caution and reconsider before entering." Dojin bristled, not because of the warning itself, but because those idiot fraudsters hadn't bothered to fake an A rank card for him in the first place. No matter how much the automated voice droned on about danger and safety protocols, Dojin strode into the gate without a second thought. He was at Bamsium Gate, a B-rank gate, D-scale tunnel. Technically, a rank was recommended, and solo entry wasn't even allowed. You were supposed to have at least 2 people. But Dojin knew these tunnel-type gates were actually best suited for lone operators. He also knew that if luck wasn't on his side, he'd be facing hundreds of monsters by himself, all in a pitch-black, claustrophobic tunnel. Just another day in a life. As if on cue, a monstrous snake with a gleaming golden head slithered into view, blocking his path. But for Dojin, this was barely a warm-up. When the snake attacked with its poisonous tongue, Dojin swiftly sliced the monster clean, making sure to extract the magic stone from its chest before the remains had even finished twitching. In midair, Dojin reviewed what he knew. This was a black fong snake, a creature infamous for its venom. Even a scratch could leave anyone paralyzed in seconds. The next instant, when Dojin landed lightly and barely phased, he jumped back into action and made sure to finish the monster, cutting it in half this time. As he did, a splash of green venom caught his left hand, but it wasn't a big deal unless it entered his veins. He winced, knowing he'd be fine, and calculated that the whole ordeal for that single magic stone would be worth at least 300,000 won if he could cash in the loot. Before he could celebrate, for more snakes lunged at him from the darkness. Without missing a beat, Dojin dismantled them one by one, their venom pooling on the floor while their limp bodies piled up around him. He shoved his hand into the biggest snake's carcass, searching for another magic stone, but found nothing. He remembered that, in the previous world, black fong snakes dropped stones less than 3% of the time. That's when he shouted, "Looks like I'll need to hunt a few hundred more of you." After finishing with those, he pressed on, moving deeper into the shimmering tunnel until he stumbled across a scattering of skeletons on the ground. Just by looking at one of them, he realized it was probably responsible for all that and wondered if he had already found the boss. In front of him was a massive, green-eyed snake that looked more dragon than serpent. He set his bag aside and thought it was convenient that he found the boss already. It could save him some time. With a jumping start, Dojin attempted to land a powerful punch at the beast, hoping for a quick victory so he could head home early. But his fist bounced off the snake's thick, golden scales, and the monster barely flinched. He wanted to try another angle, but the snake struck back, slamming him into the wall so hard he saw stars. The creature lunged, jaws snapping and ready to devour him. But Dojin twisted away at the last second and immediately decided to use this opening for a counterattack to its belly. Yet again, those golden scales shrugged off the blow. He had enough time to realize this wasn't like the other snakes. This thing was on a completely different level. Dojin knew that if he were in peak form, this fight would be nothing. But right now, with his weak body, he needed something extra. That's when he spotted a battered sword left behind by some unlucky hero who'd come before him. Even an old blade in skilled hands was better than nothing. And anyway, he had no other option. He grabbed the sword and slowly stepped forward. The dungeon boss didn't give him a chance to come up with a strategy to fight and just attacked, but Dojin had already found a way. He jumped high into the air, not only dodging the attack, but also finding a better position. With the words, "Consider an honor to fall by my hand, snakehead," he focused on his goal to strike. Still, the big snake wasn't done either and tried to face him head-on. This time, he directly aimed for the monster's head, and the ancient sword gleamed as Dojin struck. Our hero not only dodged the monster's furious attack, but with a precise swing, he crushed the monster's head. The fight was over, and the broken sword had done its job a little too well, crumbling to pieces in his grip after that. Dojin stared at the remains, half amused, half annoyed. Soon after, he turned his attention to the snake's corpse and yanked out one of its massive fangs, saying, with a bit of sharpening, "This'll make a handy tool, and it definitely pays better than Namsan." Only then did he realize it was time to leave this cursed place. By the time he emerged from the gate, the sky was dark, and the city pulsed with neon life. One B-rank dungeon had eaten up most of his day, so he made it a top priority to restore his strength. He thought about his old comrades, grateful they hadn't seen him in this current weak state, and gazed up at the night sky. On the next seemingly normal morning, a cheerful mascot danced outside a Mana Stone exchange shop, swaying to an invisible beat and drawing glances from passersby. Inside, a rebellious fighter with sporting a piece of armor strapped to his right shoulder was busy sorting through a pile of magic stones on the desk. The shopkeeper, with the weary air of someone who'd said it 1,000 times before, announced, "Commissions at 40%, as usual." The fighter rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed, and only dared to say, "That's way too high." As a regular, he still held out hope for a discount. The shopkeeper, perhaps sensing his reluctance, pulled out a thick stack of bills and tried to sweeten the deal while insisting they really do have the lowest commission around. He came up with some excuses to make that 40% look more reasonable. After spending some time calculating, he laid the cash on the counter. The fighter, looking convinced but unsatisfied, started counting through the pile. But he couldn't ignore the elephant in the room any longer and asked, "Hey, what happened to your face?" It was the same boy from the other day who had decided to mess with Dojin and got a well-deserved punishment. The shopkeeper sighed, the memory clearly still fresh. "Got roughed up by some random guy. Even all my C-rank guards were no help." He was, in fact, the same shopkeeper whom Dojin had educated just a few days earlier. Now, he found himself being lectured by this new fighter, who insisted the real mistake was letting their guard down. Then, like an experienced one, he mentioned, "It's not just about rank, it takes real skill to make guys like that pay." Eventually, the fighter's rambling wore thin, and the beleaguered shopkeeper politely asked him to leave. Before heading out, the fighter offered to lend a hand next time trouble showed up, though right at that moment, someone walked past who needed no introduction. It was none other than Dojin. The shopkeeper's face instantly darkened. He pointed a shaking finger and burst out, "It's him! It's him! The bastard who did this to me!" The fighter was stunned. "Wait, that pretty boy. He's the one who caused all that chaos." He cracked his knuckles menacingly and warned, "A hero can't just go around hitting innocent civilians, right?" The shopkeeper, now emboldened with an audience, chimed in, "He is a 7-year veteran hero, and he knows plenty of senior and junior heroes." Dojin barely glanced at them. "Mind your own business and get lost," he said so coldly that it left the fighter momentarily speechless. Just to make sure, Dojin turned back and asked if this guy really was planning to take revenge for the shopkeeper. The fighter's temper flared, but his 7 years of experience pulled him back from the edge. He thought to himself, the leading cause of death for heroes isn't monsters. It's getting into pointless fights with other heroes. With that, the fighter made his exit, leaving Dojin alone with the shell-shocked shopkeeper. Dojin, still annoyed, realized this beaten-up guy probably complained a lot and asked if he had anything else to say now. Without waiting for an answer, he tossed his heavy bag of mana stones onto the counter and told the shopkeeper to tally them up. The shopkeeper's jaw dropped at the dazzling glow of the high-grade stones and, of course, the number of them. He couldn't help but wonder just who this guy really was to manage that many magic stones. He started counting, and when he finished, the total was a staggering 150 million won. Unexpectedly, that wasn't nearly enough to satisfy Dojin, especially after spending a long day in a B-rank gate. With no other option, he requested the equivalent amount of money immediately. The shopkeeper, regaining his composure, reminded him about the commission. That set Dojin off again, but he quickly recalled their last argument. "Ah, right, the 1% commission." Dojin did the math, 148.5 million won after the deduction. The shopkeeper panicked. Was this guy seriously ignoring the standard 40% commission again? But remembering what happened the previous time, he didn't dare to argue about it. Instead, he came up with a decision to buy some time, saying, "Transactions over 100 million need my boss's approval." That's when Dojin shot back and urged him to get approval right away. The shopkeeper nervously dialed his boss and tried to explain the situation. Dojin, growing impatient, simply grabbed the phone and, with a polite but unmistakably firm tone, told the boss, "Just tell him to hand over the money." Under pressure, the boss relented but insisted on speaking with his employee. That didn't happen. Dojin casually flung the phone across the room, embedding it into the cement wall with a satisfying thunk. The shopkeeper, now thoroughly frozen in place, had no choice but to fetch the cash. There was so much that he needed to put it in several bags. Dojin scooped up his winnings and left, tossing over his shoulder, "Let's have a smoother deal next time." The shopkeeper, meanwhile, was left on the verge of tears. 10 minutes later, the door burst open, and the boss stormed in, demanding to know why his calls had gone unanswered. His exhausted employee, still reeling, just muttered, "I'm quitting." Only then did the boss notice the phone lodged in the wall and realize exactly why he'd been ignored. But still, he wasn't about to let that boy mess everything up and walk away just like that. And the beaten-up boy also realized something was going to be different this time. Frustrated, he whipped out his own phone and dialed Juyin. ordering her to come immediately. The person he called was so well known and pretty that people would stop and stare whenever she walked down the street, drawn by her elegant manner and impeccable style. Soon after, she arrived at the requested location and took a look around before entering the building. When she entered the shop, the weary employee almost fainted and turned to excitement. She greeted him with a calm blink and introduced herself. The poor guy was floored. Korea's fourth S-rank hero, Hyun-jin, was right there in his shop. He'd heard she was the boss's niece, but never imagined he'd actually meet her. That's when she explained why she's here. My uncle said a hero gave him a headache over a Mana Stone sale. Then she took a seat, crossing her legs with quiet authority. So, can you tell me exactly what happened? And what should I do now? Hours later, in a modest yard of their humble home, Dojin sat cross-legged beneath the warm sun, while Yunying played nearby with her precious dolls. The day was peaceful, almost deceptively so. Dojin was deep in meditation, focusing not only on honing his body, but also on strengthening his spirit. But lately, his thoughts spiraled around money and time. The bothersome thought was that even if he spent every waking moment hunting, he'd barely pull in 100 million won a day. At this rate, it would be far too late to reach his goals. There was only one solution, and he knew what he needed: a solo hunt in an S-rank gate. The key, he realized, was regaining the strength he'd had in his previous life. However, the mana in this world was pitifully scarce, at least compared to what he remembered. Even if he gathered mana through meditation every single day for years, it might take 3 years or longer to get back to where he was. He sighed, thinking that better equipment could speed up the process, but there was hardly any decent gear to be found here, not even the usual junk equipment lying around. Then, as if struck by something, Dojin's eyes widened. He glanced at Yunying and suddenly sprang to his feet, racing toward her. "You need to go inside," he shouted, scooping her up like one of her dolls and rushing for the door. His grandma, alarmed by the commotion, hurried over, asking if there was an earthquake. The way Dojin moved must have made it seem like something even worse, and poor Yunying was left clinging to him in confusion. "It's not an earthquake," Dojin said, peering up at the sky. "I think this is—" But before he could finish, the sky darkened as bolts of purple lightning streaked overhead, turning day into night. A storm raged over the city, but this was no ordinary squall. "It's a rift," Dojin declared, watching as the world seemed to split apart. Grandma, clutching Yunying tightly, cried out, "What in the world is happening?" That's when Dojin urged them both to stay inside, while he dashed outside fearlessly. Without another word, he sprinted toward the ominous, purple glowing rift that had opened right in their yard and vanished into its depths, leaving behind the desperate shouts of his family. Meanwhile, across the city at the Hero Association headquarters, chaos erupted. Agents and officials stared at their monitors in disbelief, realizing a new rift had opened in the Mappo neighborhood. The manager, clad in a crisp black suit, quickly took charge. He barked orders to dispatch every available hero to the scene, starting with the White Lion Guild is closest to Mappo. Get them on the line immediately. He then asked for the rift's exact location, and one of his subordinates replied, "It's in the yard of a private residence." The manager's worry deepened. If a civilian, not a registered hero, entered a fresh rift, it was a nightmare scenario. No one could follow until the first person emerged, and if that person died inside, it would trigger a monster wave, 10 days of monsters pouring out of the rift and into the city, wreaking havoc everywhere. He immediately asked if the identity of the entrant had been confirmed, and his assistant nodded. "It's Dojin." According to his grandmother, he went in to save his little sister. They didn't even know if Dojin was a hero or a normal civilian, but they knew if Dojin didn't make it, a monster wave was almost guaranteed, statistically a 99.9% probability. The entire office fell silent, the weight of impending disaster pressing down on them. Elsewhere in the city, a stack of papers slammed onto a desk. Dojin's stepmother was livid. "Awakened? Dojin awakened? What are you talking about?" she demanded, glaring at her bodyguard. The bodyguard stood stiffly, reporting, "Dojin awakened last time in the gate, even though he hasn't officially registered for hero status yet." She ground her teeth, making the sweat wash over her guard's face, while she declared, "What the hell did that Kong Chul bastard do? If he couldn't finish the job, he must pay back 10 times what he was paid." She fumed, ordering the bodyguard to keep tabs on Kong Chulwa. That's when the bodyguard replied, "There may be no need. A new rift has opened in Mappo, right at Dojin's house, and the media is already confirming he entered." The woman finally allowed herself a sigh of relief. Well, maybe that's the last we'll see of that little troublemaker. Still, she instructed her man to keep a close watch on the news. Inside the rift, Dojin was moving around barefoot on soft earth, surrounded by a dense, ancient forest. He didn't even have time to pull on a shirt, his bare upper body glistening as he took in his surroundings. Recognition washed over him. This is the Petishua forest, memories flooding back. The towering trees, the wild grass, the wind that seemed to whisper secrets. Even the sky and clouds overhead matched those from his childhood. The air here was thick with mana, so much so that it prickled against his skin. He moved forward, following the path he knew by heart, and soon found what he was looking for, the World Tree. It stood in the center of the forest, its ancient trunk aglow with a gentle blue light. As soon as he saw that magnificent tree, a thought came to his mind, a primordial spirit tree, a source of pure, powerful mana. He approached and pressed his palm to the tree's tough bark, feeling the pulse of energy beneath. He remembered that in his previous world, when this tree burned, all mana flow was destroyed, and with it, the world itself. He couldn't explain why the tree was still intact here, but he wasn't about to question a miracle. If this tree could restore his strength, he had to take the chance. He stepped inside the tree's radiant glow, letting the blue light of mana envelop him, and began to concentrate, knowing he could regain his mana and strength much faster here. Even after a while, Dojin was trying his best to focus, feeling the deep spirituality of the place as mana surged through his body. He stayed there, meditating day after day, so focused that he actually forgot to eat or drink. Before he knew it, he'd spent 10 straight days doing nothing but breathing and channeling his energy. One night, under the moon shining over the forest, he finally opened his eyes wide as he sensed something dangerous approaching. The volcanoes. These monsters were infamous because they had burned the World Tree in the past and were probably coming to do it a second time. Dojin decided to return the favor and not let that happen. So he stepped down from his chamber and prepared for an all-out battle. The first thought that came to his mind was, it'd be nice to have a water element sword, right? The best counter for these creatures. But since that wasn't available and the beast came charging, he didn't hesitate. Instead of a water sword, he decided to use his body as a weapon. He believed that with the overflowing mana in his body, he could handle things easily. Simply by moving his hand and pointing at them, a streak of bright blue energy burst from his hand, targeting the monsters before they could even come close. He was so focused, so relentless, that when other volcanoes rushed him, he just repeated the move while a magnetic blue aura surrounded his body. In reality, he was channeling condensed mana, letting it explode as chi. Every time he unleashed that much power, the monsters could only scream as they found themselves hopeless against those attacks. After fighting for a short time, Dojin slowly began to feel tired, as it had been so long since he released mana this way, especially with his much weaker body. Just then, the remaining volcanoes changed strategy and decided to fire back, shooting rays of purple light at Dojin and the World Tree. But as expected, he blocked and reflected their attacks without much effort. He knew protecting the World Tree was his top priority, but with all that mana building up inside him, he decided it was best to go on the offensive. As the next beast lunged with its jaws wide open, Dojin calmly thrust his palm into its mouth, sending a surge of mana straight through its body. The monster almost exploded from the inside out, and soon, with a great blue light emanating from its body, the creature started to disappear, leaving only ashes and some mana stones behind. After confirming the best way to deal with these creatures, he moved on to the next, as many of them were still left. He was not only unafraid, but actually excited to confront those ugly creatures. And just like that, he started tearing apart the volcanoes one after another, as if he were playing a game. Once he got rid of them, he returned and stood in front of the World Tree. That's when his eyes caught something that looked like a gold coin among the magic stones. He didn't hesitate and moved to grab it. It was actually an undying ember. He remembered the high drop rate of it from volcanoes and was honestly curious to see how many he could collect this time. When he fully analyzed it, Dojin clenched his fist, absorbing the ruby into his body just like that. A wild, living blaze flickered to life between his hands, but it wasn't harmful. It was just part of the process. Actually, Dojin wanted to draw even more mana from the World Tree, but his current body couldn't handle that yet. What he could do for now was absorb as much ember energy as he could. To make the absorbing process faster, he attached the remaining ember to his chest, and instantly, his blue mana shifted to a fiery attribute, making it seem like he was now the master of an unstoppable, relentless flame pouring from his body. He remembered that, back when he fought alongside his old comrades, he never even needed to absorb an ember like this. But now, the situation was different, and it took him a full 10 minutes just to merge with one. At first, Dojin tried to see if he felt any different in his body, but just then, he spotted plenty of other undying embers scattered through the grass. So, Dojin decided to keep at it, absorbing as many as he could. He had a feeling he'd need all the strength he could get, especially with even scarier monsters sure to show up in the near future. On a gloomy day near Dojin's house, people gathered, staring in awe at the dark purple shape of the rift. Journalists snapped photos while the police did their best to keep the crowd under control. Bang Song-woo, a hero from the association, cursed, clearly frustrated as he tried to manage the chaos, and his irritation at the young man named Dojin who'd gone into the rift. His co-worker, Kim Hyun-woo, tried to calm him down, explaining that Dojin had gone in to save his sister. But Bang Song-woo wasn't buying it. Please, he didn't care about anyone else. He probably just heard there was a chance to awaken in a rift zone and rushed in, hoping for power. Kim asked what the guild master had to say about the situation, but Song-woo just waved him off, saying all they'd received was the standard protocol. Basically, wait for the wave. Kim pointed out that this time, rifts had popped up all over the world at the same time. In the US, China, the UK, Turkey, and Switzerland. It seemed that was part of why the guild master was so busy, as this was the first time anything like this had ever happened. Song-woo grew angrier because he heard they had managed to get things under control early in those places, and the only place that wasn't under control was here. All because of some damn beggar-like bastard. He'd regret saying that later, but right now he just clenched his fist, promising to smash Dojin's face in if he ever came back out. Dojin's house wasn't the same as before. It had been 28 days since the rift had appeared, and the Hero Association had even issued a level 1 monster wave alert, just in case the first person who entered didn't make it out in the next 2 days. Meanwhile, someone was following this news on TV, and right after getting details, shut it down. It was the mafia boss, who still doubted if that civilian everyone was talking about was actually Dojin. When he asked his right-hand man, he nodded in confirmation, mentioning that indeed he was Dojin. His right-hand man went on about how there was no way Dojin could get out of that hellish rift. He was just a civilian, after all. But the boss just laughed, wondering how his right-hand man didn't actually know about Dojin, glancing at his battered, bandaged lone sharks, the same ones who'd tangled with Dojin last time. He knew the Hero Association really didn't have a clue, just like his right hand did. Right then, a question crossed his mind, and he asked, but what if that guy actually isn't awakened? The black-suited man was suddenly unsure and even admitted that being awakened, and even a good fighter, wasn't the same as surviving a rift, something that the boss man himself was well aware of. An idea popped into the boss's head, and just mentioning it shocked his assistant. He suggested they should grab Dojin's 2 family members as hostages. If Dojin died, they could sell off their organs. If he survived, they could claim they'd looked after them and create a new debt. Meanwhile, inside the rift, as usual, the world tree glowed with blue light, while Dojin burned with golden flames nearby. He wasn't aware of how much time had passed, but the hundreds of undying embers he'd absorbed were clear proof of his growing strength. Now, he could use flame attribute mana whenever he wanted, and his flame resistance had shot up sky high. In terms of the flame attribute, he was even stronger now than when people called him Sword God. He reached out and placed his hand on the tree's bark, feeling the ancient life pulsing from past to present. "Thank you, World Tree," he said, collecting his treasures into a handmade basket. He knew he might never see the tree again, but he promised, if we ever meet again and you're in danger, I'll protect you, no matter what. With that, and after almost a month, he finally started to depart and get back home. Back in Meipo, night had fallen when Dojin quietly stepped out of the rift, noticing there wasn't a soul within a kilometer. Everyone had probably evacuated to prepare for the wave. He sensed a faint, strong aura and ran toward it immediately. Soon, he found himself behind a wall, spotting Bang Song-woo and Kim Hyun-woo as they chatted about the day. Judging by their uniforms, he guessed these were the same guys from the last gate, and he knew things could get complicated if they spotted him. Thinking fast, he conjured a blaze in his hand and hurled it at a distant junkyard. The fire caught instantly and made an explosive blast, drawing the agent's attention. Just as Dojin planned, It immediately got their focus, and they rushed toward the flames to see what had happened, with some curious onlookers following, eager to find the reason for the explosion. The agents had no clue what caused the blaze, but Dojin was satisfied with the results, because now, without any watching eyes, he could make a safe and quiet comeback. Cusack, even you would appreciate this flame, wouldn't you? He mused to himself, thinking of his old friend, the continent's greatest flame mage, who'd once fought by his side. Back at the association's agents, Kim Hyun-woo suddenly sensed something and turned around to see the rift itself starting to change. The dark purple shades were getting smaller. The agents sprinted back, and to everyone's shock, the rift was actually disappearing right before their eyes. Dojin, meanwhile, slipped away from his neighborhood, treasures in tow. The ever-cool hero had already defused a disaster that could have wrecked the whole city, even if no one believed in him. The news of the disappearing rift spread across the entire country the next day, when a broadcaster reported, "The rift that opened in Mappo vanished early this morning." The Hero Association, who had been bracing for a monster wave, was caught off guard by this unexpected disappearance and is now launching a full investigation into what happened. Meanwhile, Dojin wandered the city in his hoodie, ignoring the whispers and sidelong glances about the man everyone was talking about. People gossiped, saying he was probably dead, or deserved to be, since only an idiot would be the first to charge into a rift. However, he didn't let their nonsense bother him. His mind was on bigger things. If the rift was gone, did that mean he'd never see the world tree again? The thought stung a little, but he shrugged it off. Maybe it was for the best. There were more important things he needed to protect now. He looked up at the sky, reminding himself of what really mattered, and made his way to Yongdongpo HCS capital. It was time to check on something important. In front of the stairs, two thugs lounged against the wall, chatting about how that Dojin guy was definitely dead, so the old lady and the kid were basically finished too. One of them, puffing on a cigarette, joked that the girl would probably grow up pretty, so the boss would find some use for her. "Hey," Dojin called out, making them spin around to see a guy in a hoodie approaching. It seemed Dojin hadn't heard exactly what they were talking about. Otherwise, they wouldn't be alive now. Instead, he simply asked where their boss was. Not long after, a black car pulled up outside. The mafia boss, Huang Changsip, stepped out with his right-hand man, looking smug while combing his hair. Now that he believed Dojin was dead, he figured he could finally sleep soundly. He asked about his schedule for the day, and the assistant informed him there was nothing much except a lunch meeting. When he heard his schedule was empty, he told his guy to book Madame Kong and her girls for some entertainment that night. After that, he headed upstairs, only to see something that froze him in place. One of his own men was flying helplessly around the office, like a defenseless child. The sight nearly gave the boss a heart attack. As he tried to process what was happening, Dojin didn't give him a second to react. There stood Dojin, very much alive and without a single scratch. Realization dawned, and sweat started to bead on the man's face. Even then, Dojin didn't hesitate. He demanded the boss crawl toward him immediately. Dojin sat down in the boss's chair, crossing his leg on the desk, waiting for him to comply. Huang Changsip was completely floored, bowing and groveling, finally realizing he was in a life-or-death situation. But that wasn't the end of it. Dojin just smirked and said, "Now bark for me. You don't even deserve to be treated like a person." He ordered Changsip again to bark like a dog, this time with a scarier tone. To everyone's shock, the mafia boss actually started barking. To help him be a better dog, Dojin used a bit of force, making the barking sound much more natural. Meanwhile, his men sat quietly facing the wall, not daring to interfere. Dojin took the opportunity to mock their boss for having such useless men. Acting as though he was fully aware of Changsip's previous actions, Dojin made it clear he wouldn't let him off with just one or two simple punishments. Seeing how dire the situation had become, Changsip started begging, promising to be Dojin's loyal dog from now on. Dojin, however, didn't agree right away. Instead, he snapped and kicked him in the face, making him crumple to the floor. Suddenly, he called for Changsip's assistant, Glasses, and told him he was the boss now. Dojin explained that replacing the boss wasn't a big deal in a gang like this, and the assistant Kim should handle it easily. But Mr. Kim went pale, scrambling to explain that the old boss had deep connections. If he suddenly became the boss, those powerful people would notice, and things could get messy. He kept begging for Dojin to forgive the boss until Dojin finally cut him off. "Why are you being so annoying? You guys are experts at dumping people in the sea or grinding them up at the junkyard, right? If you don't want to do it, I can always just throw him into a gate as monster food. That sent a chill through the whole room. Everyone started begging for their lives. Meanwhile, Huang Changseep was practically on the floor, pleading harder than ever to be spared. Dojin decided it was time to end this circus and offered the boss his hand. Huang Changseep's face lit up with hope as he grabbed it, swearing, "I'll serve you from now on, master." Unfortunately for him, a hot pain shot up his arm as his hand seemed to catch fire from Dojin's grip. Dojin had only pretended to forgive them, but he had no intention of letting everything go so easily. He held the man's hand firmly, watching him scream in pain until he finally let go. Not out of mercy, but because Changseep's hand had burned so badly it was severed from the wrist. After that harsh lesson, Dojin started to walk away, making one thing clear. He knew they wouldn't dare to touch his new family after this, but that wasn't enough. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to protect his family around the clock for the rest of their lives. Otherwise, none of them would get out alive. For most people in that city, Dojin had become a ghost, just another casualty swallowed up by the rift. While he and Yunying quietly ate lunch in a regular restaurant, just like any other family, though the government, the Hero Association, and every news outlet had already written him off as dead. But Dojin knew better than to tell them otherwise. Stirring things up would only bring trouble, and besides, he could count on Huang Changseep to help him find a new place. So he decided to take it easy and move at his own pace. Yunying was happily digging into her food, but her real excitement came from the fact that they were moving. She could keep going to kindergarten, and next year, she'd start school for real. Suddenly, her face fell, and Dojin noticed right away. He gently asked if she didn't want to go to kindergarten, but her answer was worse than he expected. She admitted she was getting bullied by other kids for not having a parent. Dojin smiled and told her she didn't have to go if she didn't want to. She could just wait and start school next year. Instantly, her face lit up with joy. Watching her, Dojin thought maybe it was time to send her somewhere better, a nice private school where no one would dare mess with her. That night, in a motel room, Dojin called Mr. Kim to task for making his grandma and sister stay in such a place. Director Kim quickly explained that their company actually owned the motel, so it was safe. A few minutes later, Dojin made it to their room. Yunying ran up and hugged him tight, and Grandma grabbed his hand with tears in her eyes, overjoyed that he'd made it back alive. Yunying was so full of happiness that even the once cold, battle-hardened hero started to feel truly alive again, like a normal person soaking in the warmth of family. Back at the restaurant, Yunying suddenly asked, "Are you a hero now?" Dojin laughed and asked if she wanted him to be one. She shook her head. "No, because heroes fight scary monsters and sometimes they die. I just want you to stay with me and Grandma for a long, long time." Dojin let out a sigh, a little disappointed, but also touched by his sister's simple wish. He remembered the harsh world he'd come from, how he'd fought monsters alone, lost so much, and survived as the last human standing. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have something precious by his side. But now, with his family close, he realized he could finally live quietly, protecting what truly mattered. Meanwhile, at the Korea Hero Association, a mysterious middle-aged man stood by the window, questioning his staff. "You really couldn't find anything?" It was Na Tae-hwang, the founder of the Korea Hero Association and director of the World Hero Federation. His staff apologized, explaining they hadn't been able to dig up any useful info. He knew a rift that disappeared naturally could easily open again. The staff agreed, saying when new variables pop up, things get dangerous. "If only a wave had hit," she began. But Tae-hwang cut her off, reminding her to choose her words carefully. "For the safety of the people, this is still a good outcome," he said. Na Tae-hwang was no ordinary official. He was one of the world's top 100 most respected heroes. If he'd ever run for president, he'd have won by a landslide. He could have toppled tycoons and conglomerates if he wanted. But none of that interested him. His heart was set on keeping people safe and preparing for the next rift. He ordered his staff to keep investigating. As she left, she added that residents in the rift area had agreed to sell their homes. Tae-hwang nodded, relieved, and told her to offer them more than market price. "Let's give them some comfort. A little extra might soften the blow for those who lost family." He turned back to his laptop, his one-eyed gaze growing serious. Rifts were opening all over again, showing up in other countries at the same time. "Something's not right," he muttered. That's when his assistant explained that it seems most countries had managed the situation, except for the UK. Those strong heroes have been sent to all the rifts. Just then, a new alert popped up, making the old hero's heart skip a beat. Breaking news. World Hero Federation urgent alert. UK Rift Wave is getting out of control. Warning. If this was true, it could mean the UK Rift was about to become a disaster for all of humanity. A few days later in the city, Dojin strolled the streets in his usual hoodie, heading for the stone exchange store. When he stepped inside and the bell chimed, the shopkeeper greeted him, but immediately froze, as if he'd just seen the ghost that haunted his nightmares. In the back, the store manager was relaxing with a newspaper when his employee suddenly yelled, "It's him!" The boss tried to play it cool, folding his paper and standing up. "Are you the one who forcefully sold magic stones here while I was away?" But Dojin was even cooler. "Perfect. I've got plenty of magic stones to sell today. Better have someone with authority handle it." He dropped his bag on the floor with a thud so loud it made the boss rethink his bravado. Still, he figured it was just a dozen low-grade stones. "We're not doing business with you," the manager said, trying to keep things polite as he asked Dojin to leave. Dojin looked a little puzzled, so the boss explained, "A 1% commission just isn't worth it for us. We'd lose money." Then, with a touch more irritation, he asked him to leave again. "You'll regret this," Dojin said with a relaxed smile, but the boss just muttered something about complicated reasons for their 5% commission structure. When a manager lost his patience and barked at him to get out and never come back, Dojin just nudged his bag with his foot. High-grade ruby stones rolled out onto the floor, and among the jewels, one glowed with a blue light. The employees gasped, eyes wide. "Wait, is that a hero magic stone?" "The legendary hero magic stone that fetches any price. Why do you have one?" Dojin shrugged. "If you don't want it, that's fine." But he knew the story behind this stone, a blue star encased in red. Years ago, a notorious Mexican drug lord named Kurzaman awakened as a hero while trying to extract drugs from magic stones, thanks to the stone's power. Since then, the hero magic stone became famous, essential for hero awakenings, magic enchantments, and an incredibly rare energy source. Its value skyrocketed. So, it was no wonder the two sellers were left speechless. Dojin told the employee to put the stones back in the bag. He was ready to leave. Suddenly, the manager's attitude did a complete 180. "Dear customer, please have a seat. Just give us a moment." The employee was soon polishing the mana stones like they were family heirlooms, and Dojin sipped on a delicious iced coffee while the boss returned, all smiles. "Dear customer, don't you think a 0.5% commission is a bit steep?" the manager said, eager to start negotiating. Dojin frowned. "If you don't like it, forget it." The boss quickly backpedaled, insisting he was just curious why Dojin wanted to lower it to 0.5%. Dojin replied bluntly, "Because you're annoying." The manager apologized again and again for his earlier behavior. "I'm tired of apologies. Just tell me, are you going to match the commission or not?" Dojin said, cutting him off. The shopkeeper thought Dojin was being seriously rude, but with his boss practically begging on his knees, the negotiations began in earnest. The manager started rambling about how no one would take less than 10% for such stones, and how rare hero magic stones were. But Dojin had no patience for long speeches. He stood up to leave. "That's too much talking. If you don't want to, you don't have to." 9%. "This is a real loss for us," the manager called out desperately. "Then don't take a loss," Dojin replied, unfazed. 8%. "My boss will kill me if he finds out," the manager insisted. "Don't do things that'll get you hit," Dojin advised with a casual shrug. 7%. "I really can't go lower," the manager pleaded. "No one's asking you to," Dojin replied, cool as ever. 6%. "I'm really not making any profit," the boss stammered. Dojin just grinned. Can a merchant survive without profit? The manager was dying inside. This was humiliating. Finally, Dojin relented. "Considering our history, I'll accept 1%. The boss was screaming on the inside about being played, but he held it in. Then Dojin dropped the bomb. "I actually have 7 more bags of these." That was enough to make every blood vessel in the room surge with excitement. The manager immediately shouted for the contract, and soon, Dojin received a message. 67 billion won had been deposited. At this rate, a 110 billion won house was within reach. The only hitch? To get more high-grade stones, gates alone weren't enough. If only he could freely roam the rift zones. Just then, an urgent notification pinged on his phone, making the manager flinch. "Is there a wave?" he asked nervously. Dojin answered calmly. "It's the UK. Looks like it's about to happen." This new disaster, he knew, was about to open up a world of possibilities. Dojin found himself lost in thought, reflecting on the latest news. It baffled him how people who clearly lacked the skill to handle a rift zone were the very ones put in charge. In the past, it wouldn't have mattered what country it was or what the association said. He would have been the first to step up and stop any fracture zone. But those days were behind him now. He had a different life to live. Inside a cozy Korean restaurant, the scent of sizzling meat filled the air, making Yunying's mouth water in anticipation. The little family of three sat around the table, and the chef finished grilling the meat right before their eyes. Grandma looked at the price list, a little worried. "Isn't 250,000 won for 100 grams a bit much?" she asked. Dojin smiled and reassured her, "Don't worry about it. Eat as much as you want. I made plenty of money this time." Yunying was the first to try a piece, and as soon as she tasted it, her eyes lit up like she'd seen heaven on a plate. Grandma still looked hesitant, but then Dojin ordered 4 more servings of different dishes, scanning the menu with confidence. The size of the order made Grandma raise her eyebrows, but Dojin just grinned. "Let's not hold back today. Enjoy yourselves." Still unconvinced, Grandma hesitated, until Yunying, with a giggle, offered her a bite of meat, gently putting the fork in her mouth. The transformation was instant. Grandma's face softened, and soon she was savoring each bite right along with the kids. That's when a new presence swept into the restaurant, turning heads. Hyeon Ji-yeon, the famous hero, walked in with all the poise and elegance of a world star. She approached their table and called Dojin's name. "Could we talk for a moment?" she asked politely. But Dojin didn't miss a beat. "Can't you see I'm having a meal with my family? If you need something, come find me after we're done." Ji-yeon was momentarily taken aback. She even tried dropping her name, hoping her reputation would help. But Dojin just shrugged, completely unfazed. Disappointed, she retreated to the waiting area and sat quietly, which only made the other diners more curious. After all, it wasn't every day you saw Hyeon Ji-yeon, the stunning S-grade hero and international star, waiting around for someone. People whispered, wondering what kind of man could make her wait. Meanwhile, Ji-yeon's irritation with Dojin only grew. She thought to herself, 2 months ago, his first gate entry and survival. Probably awakened then. Everyone assumed he died in a new Mapo fracture. Yet here he is, alive. He makes me tense with just a look and a word. But S-grade in less than 2 months? No way. Kafmore, the oil conglomerate, spent 5 years to get someone to S-grade after awakening. He must have some other special ability. Finishing their meal, Dojin and his family were about to leave when they spotted Ji-yeon. But before they could pass, a broad-shouldered man stepped in front of them, locking eyes with Dojin, his expression stony and cold. A flash of anger crossed Dojin's eyes as the man spoke. Well, look who crawled out of the gate. I'm honestly surprised to see you alive." It was Kang Cheol-woo. He sneered, "I always knew you were a bug, but I didn't realize you were a cockroach." Of all times, Kang Cheol-woo had to show up now, right when Dojin's grandma and sister were in the room. Thinking on his feet, Dojin quickly turned to Ji-yeon. "You there? You said you had business with me, right?" She blinked in surprise, but Dojin pressed on. "Hyeon Ji-yeon, I'll listen to whatever you need. But first, could you help my family? Just catch them a taxi and make sure they get home safe." Ji-yeon hesitated, wondering what kind of favor this was, but Dojin kept it simple. "Just put them in a cab. That's all I'm asking." He turned to his family, gave them a reassuring nod, then faced Kang Cheol-woo head-on. As he stared down his old enemy, Dojin knew exactly what awaited him. Fire, fury, and a reckoning long overdue. That night, outside the Azura restaurant, Ji-yeon helped Yunying and Grandma into a taxi. She leaned down to the window, smiling warmly. "Cute little lady, goodbye. Take care of your grandma, okay?" She waved as the taxi pulled away, watching until its taillights faded into the city. Back inside the restaurant, Dojin made a casual gesture, as if he'd just slapped Kang Cheol-woo across the face, a move that only made the other man's expression twist with rage. The tension was thick, and it didn't take long for things to escalate. As a waitress nervously approached to warn them to take their business elsewhere, Kang Cheol-woo lashed out, knocking her to the ground with a brutal shove. Panic rippled through the restaurant. Customers scrambled for the exit, urging others to get out too, while the monstrous man turned his anger fully on Dojin. "Do you want to die? I'm asking you. Do you wish to die, bastard?" he shouted, voice echoing off the empty walls. But before he could say another word, Dojin delivered a swift kick to Kang Cheol-woo's face, forcing him to his knees. With calm intensity, Dojin said, You're the one who dragged me into the gate and locked me inside to die, aren't you? We really do have a lot to talk about. Kong Chulwo glared at the floor, bitterness in his eyes. What do I have to talk about with a guy abandoned by his own father? Or about your stepmother, who wants you dead? Without missing a beat, Dojin unlocked his phone, hit the record button, and held it up. Go ahead. Say that again. Instead, Kong Chulwo cursed and, in a flash, ignited his hand with his signature fiery power. He lunged at Dojin, spitting out another insult about Dojin's mother. But Dojin's eyes were wide, alert. He caught the punch with mana-charged strength, the energy surging into his palm. The impact sent Kong Chulwo flying backward, shock plastered on his face as he realized his own power had been deflected. Dojin retaliated with a blast of blue mana, slamming his rival further across the room. As the fight raged in the now-deserted restaurant, the shaken waitress fumbled for her phone to call the police, her hands trembling so much she seemed to forget the emergency number. Before she could dial, a gentle hand took the phone away. Jian, now standing beside her, calmly reassured her, "It's okay, I'll handle this." The waitress, recognizing the celebrity, could only nod in grateful awe. Meanwhile, Kong Chulwo found himself cornered, completely outmatched. Ju-yun watched closely, her mind racing. If Kong Chulwo, who was a solid B-rank hero, was being demolished like this, did that mean Dojin was actually above B rank? Maybe even A rank? Even if he is an A rank, is it really possible for him to toy with a B rank like that? She wondered, then raised her voice as Dojin wound up for another punch. You might actually kill him. Dojin hesitated, coming back to his senses. He released Kong Chulwo and rose to his feet. Ju-yun approached, her tone serious. How much do you know about Kong Chul? Dojin shrugged. I know enough. Why? Does it matter? Kong Chulwo's cousin is Kong Yongpyo. He's an S-rank hero, she explained. Dojin just looked at her, completely unfazed. Yeah, I already knew. Doesn't matter to me. Ju-yun studied him, trying to understand how he could be so fearless, or maybe just reckless. The only reason Kong Chulwo gets away with everything is because Yongpyo protects him. That means what you're doing right now is very dangerous. I get that you two have a serious grudge, but don't think Yongpyo will see it your way. Dojin's smile only widened. So, you're asking if I'm afraid of Kong Yongpyo? But before he could answer further, his tone shifted, almost bitter. Honestly, what bothers me more is how much you seem to know about me. They stood there, eye to eye, the air between them charged with rivalry and something more. Meanwhile, across the restaurant, the poor waitress fretted, glancing at Ji-yun. Would this famous hero really keep her promise and take care of everything? The answer, like so much else tonight, seemed uncertain. Inside the restaurant, Ji-yun and Dojin continued their silent standoff. One an unknown warrior, the other a celebrity hero. Ji-yun began, with her polite but direct tone, that she was sorry about dropping in unannounced, but she was here at her uncle's request, whom he sold those magic stones to, as he was the Gazan stone dealer, but she demanded him to sell them to her instead. Dojin raised an eyebrow, asking how many she was looking to buy. She replied confidently that whatever he had, she would take it. He considered this for a moment, then declared to her that he had got quite a few. She met his gaze with an easy smile, mentioning that the assets of an S-rank hero were beyond imagination. Dojin nodded and told her, "It's not that I won't sell, but I have a condition. Nothing major, nothing you can't handle, Hyun-ji-yun." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Dojin's stepmother glared at her employee. You told me he was dead, that he died entering that new rift. The bodyguard shrank back, apologizing and claiming that it was what the Hero Association had reported. They believed he was gone. She cut him off by inquiring about his plan to fix this. He hesitated, then added that Kong Chulwo was also defeated by Dojin. Her eyes narrowed. All of Dojin's defiance suddenly made sense. Maybe he knew more than she thought. She waved a dismissive hand. If my father or my husband hears about this, it'll be a mess. Still, I can cover it up. But if the media gets wind, the group's stock price will tank. Stop it before it spreads. She ordered him to intercept the media immediately. If this goes public, T Group and even W Group will pull all their advertising and cut us off. He nodded, assuring her. The police and the media have already been silenced. She let out a sigh of relief, sinking in her chair, but he leaned in, lowering his voice. You do realize that's just a temporary fix, right? He reminded her. Kong Chulwo's cousin is Kong Yongpyo. Her eyes widened at the implication. He continued. Even among heroes, Kong Chulwoo was notorious trash. People think Kong Yongpyo really cares about him, but in truth, Chul is just a pawn for all of Yongpyo's dirty work. If the police and media manipulate Chulwo, it gets messy for Yongpyo too. He's already making moves. She immediately ordered him to set up a meeting with Yongpyo as soon as possible, and he nodded and left. She turned to another matter that she had heard Huang Changseep, president of HCS Capital, had betrayed them. The subordinate confirmed it, adding that he was now protecting Dojin's family. A dark look crossed her face, so he ordered him to contact Prosecutor Park because that traitor needed to pay for abandoning her for that brat. Elsewhere in that city, Dojin, Juyun, and their team waited in line at a Rift Zone checkpoint, ready to have their IDs checked before entering. There were 37 Rift Zones in Korea. 5 were currently being converted into gates, while the rest could only be raided by Hero Association members, who scheduled their hunts carefully. An agent checked Juyun's ID and handed it back, barely glancing at the famous name. The group made their way through a dark, cave-like entrance. Even with Juyun's fame, security left nothing to chance, double-checking everything. Zhang and Ju, an A-rank hero and master of the Cleome Guild, grinned at Juyun. I can't believe you actually suggested hunting in a rift zone first. Yuyeon used frugit. I just wanted to do something fun. But as she glanced at Dojin, it was clear his presence was part of her motivation. It was all part of the deal they'd made in the restaurant. If she helped him get into the rift zone, he'd sell her all his magic stones at market price. Dojin explained, honestly, I just make more money hunting inside a rift zone. Juyun found herself mulling over his words. Did he really come to this dangerous place just for some extra cash? If so, that was a little insane, but she couldn't deny she needed those stones, regardless of her uncle's request. One by one, the team emerged from the tunnel into the open, sunlight-dappled rift. Inju nudged Juyun, teasing, seriously, you're going to keep pretending he's just some guy you know? Juyun rolled her eyes. He really is just someone I know. Inju grinned wickedly. Are you telling me he's not your boyfriend? No. Juyun shot back, not missing a beat. I just owe him, and I'm paying him back. That's all. Inju raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Since when does an S-rank hero owe anyone? As the rest of the group chatted and checked their weapons, a sudden noise cut through the air, making everyone tense. Instantly, weapons were drawn, and the team went on high alert. Dojin, however, looked relaxed, almost bored, as he simply waited to see what would happen next. Out of nowhere, a massive hawk-like monster swooped down from the sky, casting a shadow over the group. Inju's voice rang out in shock. That's a cockatrice. Juyun snapped into leader mode, barking orders. Junju Doyan, defense. Sungo, aim for its legs. But before anyone could move, Dojin's eyes flashed. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the beast. Mana surged around him, and with a single leap, he soared skyward, momentarily looking like he commanded the skies instead of the monster. The team gasped, terrified something would happen to the new guy. But Dojin just gathered even more mana, grinned, and declared, let's hope that's just the first one. It all happened the moment he stepped through the gate. The beast's sharp eyes locked onto him, and in that split second, his instincts and body aligned. There was no hesitation. He was all in. To everyone's shock, he bolted forward in a flash, kicking up stones as he rocketed skyward. The monster, used to being the predator, tried to retaliate with its usual maneuvers. But Dojin had a fiery trick up his sleeve. Channeling his special skill, he ignited his hand with mana and landed a burning punch right to the beast's face. The flames sealed the monster's fate, and it crashed to the ground with a deafening thud. Dojin landed smoothly, right in front of Juyun's astonished eyes. For a moment, the hunter and the hunted simply stared at each other, one breathing hard, the other completely still. The giant creature lay defeated, and the rest of the group was utterly flabbergasted. One of them could barely believe what they'd just seen. Did he really take it down in a single hit? But Dojin wasn't finished. He raised his foot and furiously stomped the creature, making sure it was down for good. The others could only watch, stunned by the wild display of power. Inju, ever curious, turned to Juyun and asked, seriously, who is this guy? Juyun, the purple-haired leader, kept her cool. Just a strong human, she replied. Inju grabbed her by the collar and shook her, exasperated. Is that what you call it? Do you know how many heroes can drop a cockatrice in one blow? Juyun shrugged. If it's just knocking them over, even my sister could do that. But her words only made Inju more frustrated. Don't give me that. We all saw what happened. a full-on aerial battle, and a one-hit KO. The truth was, Jian didn't have a good explanation. Even she was unsure who the real monster was, the fallen eagle or the man who defeated it. The mystery gnawed at her, and she decided they needed to change tactics. "I'm heading to the center for a bit," she announced, surprising her comrades. Then she made her way to Dojin, who was busy cutting open the creature's chest with a blade. Before she could say anything, Dojin cut her off. "I'm not sharing with anyone who didn't help. Simple as that." The bluntness stung, but Jian shot back. "I wasn't planning to ask for any." She looked him over and added, "Your skills don't really suit this area. If you want something real, you need to go deeper." Dojin gave her a sly grin. "Sounds fun to me." She smirked. "I know this place like the back of my hand. I'll lead, just try not to get lost." With that, Jian dashed ahead, practically a blur. Dojin watched her for a moment, then struck a sprinter's pose and blasted off after her, leaving the gang staring after him like he was a tornado. Inju, watching their retreating figures, sighed. "If Jian's a bullet, that guy is light itself." Another member asked if they should follow, and Inju just shook her head. "If you can, be my guest. But we'll just stick to being the sidekicks today. Let's hunt around like usual." The group scattered to do their own thing, but Inju lingered by the monster's corpse. She reflected on how, as A-rank heroes, they were praised everywhere, but compared to an S rank, they were nothing but small fry. It seemed like Jian, and now that mysterious man, were on a whole different level. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Jian was still sprinting at top speed. She glanced over her shoulder. No sign of Dojin. Maybe she should slow down so he could catch up? But suddenly, he appeared at her side, urging her to go faster, as if her pace was a crawl. He shot ahead so quickly she lost her balance, nearly stumbling. Jian's jaw dropped in disbelief. She was one of the fastest heroes in South Korea. No one should be able to catch, let alone outpace her. But there he was, standing a few steps ahead, wearing that annoyingly confident smile. "You're slower than I expected," he teased. "Are you running like this just to make sure I can keep up?" Ju-Yun's cheeks flushed with indignation. "What kind of rude statement is that?" she huffed, but she was too out of breath to keep scolding him. After catching their breath, they realized they had reached the base of a mountain. Dojin nodded toward it. "What's up there?" Ju-Yun's expression turned grave. "That's where the rift's boss monster lives." The boss, Kassirian, a towering, 20-meter beast that looked every bit like a wyvern from a nightmare. She shot him a warning glare. "Don't even think about it. It takes at least 3 S-rank heroes to take down that thing." Dojin asked, "Is it the one with the Sang-Sang grade magic stone?" She nodded. "Yeah, the imaginary grade, just under the highest class. But honestly, I doubt you're even listening to me right now." He took a step forward. It made Julian nervous. "You're not seriously planning to take it on, are you? I didn't bring you here for crazy stunts like that." But it was too late. Dojin broke into a sprint, dashing toward the mountain and leaving Jian behind. Her face went pale with shock and a little bit of fear, but then her competitive spirit flared up. "If he's going to be reckless, then so will I," she muttered, and chased after him. They ran, side by side, kicking up clouds of dust as they charged down the rift's winding path. Ahead of them waited a real adventure, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to bring down the boss of the rift, once and for all. Jian's eyes were wide with disbelief, struggling to process what she was seeing. How on earth could this be real? A formidable boss monster, Kassirian itself, was sprawled out motionless at her feet, completely defeated. Meanwhile, Dojin calmly fished his dagger out his bag, as if this were just another routine day at work. Julian, on the other hand, was anything but calm. Kassirian was infamous for being nearly unbeatable. Even Park Hae-yeol, one of Korea's most legendary S-rank heroes and a giant of a man, had led the very first Kassirian raid with 30 A-grade heroes. Every single A-grade hero perished, and Park Hae-yeol barely made it out alive, singed by the dragon's fiery breath. Determined to settle the score, Park Hae-yeol later returned with another S-rank hero and 200 A-grade heroes. They battled with everything they had, managing to restrain the beast with enchanted ropes while Park Hae-yeol finally landed the knockout blow. Kassirian fell, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The casualties were staggering, and Park Hae-yeol's mega guild, Sweet Life, never truly recovered. Even 3 years on, they were still feeling the aftermath. Now, here was Dojin, standing over Kassirian's corpse, looking at Jian with his trademark calm and determination. "You know you didn't contribute at all, right?" he said, almost teasing. Of course, Jian knew. Even if she hadn't witnessed it herself, She wouldn't have believed it possible. The notorious Kazarian, so tall, so massive, fell by this man with a single precise strike to its Achilles heel. As if that weren't enough, Dojin then nonchalantly plucked the priceless mana stone from the beast and examined it, as if collecting high-grade gems was just another item on his daily to-do list. He tucked the mana stone away and announced that he didn't need a guide anymore. From here on out, I'll move alone, he said, matter of fact. Jian, still processing the scene, reminded him that Kazarian's byproducts, such as its beak, claws, and other rare materials, were extremely valuable, sometimes even more so than the mana stone itself. Dojin paused, glanced back at her, and shrugged. They won't fetch the kind of money I'm after. By now, Jian was so accustomed to his blunt, almost reckless attitude that nothing surprised her anymore. Dojin explained that he could make more profit collecting magic stones from other monsters during that same amount of time. You could take the byproducts as a guide fee, if you want, he offered. The elegant Jian looked down at the massive corpse and shook her head. No thanks. They're all yours. Later that afternoon, the rest of the team gathered around Dojin's backpack, jaws dropping as they stared at the heap on the ground. Someone finally broke the silence, pointing out that Dojin had borrowed the huge bag and returned with it filled to bursting with mana stones. It was hard to believe. That much loot would take their entire guild at least 20 hours of nonstop hunting, maybe even 3 full days if luck wasn't on their side. Jian knelt down to inspect a stone, just as one of the others finally voiced the question on everyone's mind. Who exactly was this guy? Inju, meanwhile, was quietly running the numbers in her head. It wasn't just the sheer speed or the quantity of stones. If what Jian said was true, Dojin had beaten Kazarian alone, and without any proper gear or suit. That alone would make him the strongest hero in South Korea, possibly even the world. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. Dojin strolled over, seemingly unfazed by the awe he left in his wake, carrying one bag on his shoulder and another in his hand. As he approached, the team exchanged glances, wondering if anyone would ever believe the events of today if they tried to talk about them. They quickly agreed. Best not to mention this to anyone, or people would think they'd lost their minds. As the elegant leader walked up to Dojin, she and Jian exchanged a few quiet words, out of earshot of the others. Naturally, this led to wild speculation. Was Jian flirting with him? It wouldn't be surprising, given how striking he was, just as handsome as she was beautiful. The group whispered among themselves, joking that maybe this was why Jian had brought such a mysterious stranger along. But the reality was far less romantic. Their conversation looked more like an argument than a flirtation, and Inju quickly realized it was strange to even think of it that way. Dojin treated Jian with the same casual bluntness as everyone else, which was pretty unusual in and of itself. In the end, Dojin handed a whole backpack to Jian and walked away, as if the matter was closed and there was nothing left to say. Inju blinked, surprised by his abruptness. He just left without even saying goodbye, she whispered. Jian let out a sigh of disappointment and nodded. Inju hurried over, eyeing the pile of loot. Did he really leave all these backpacks behind? Jian replied. When I told him that if word got out he'd beaten Kazarian, he'd become instantly famous, he just shrugged and said fame was too much of a hassle, so he told me to take care of it. That, Inju realized, was the most shocking thing she'd heard in her life. She couldn't stop thinking about it, or about the mysterious man who turned their world upside down in a single afternoon. And to be honest, Jian found herself wondering the same thing. Just who was this man, really? On a regular day, where sunlight glinted off the windows of an elegant high-rise, a punching bag was taking a serious beating, swaying wildly as a furious hero unleashed his frustration. With a final, explosive punch, he tore the bag apart and muttered under his breath. Not even close. It's like a baby's punch. This perfectionist was Park Haeol, S-rank hero of the Korean Hero Association and guild master of Sweet Life. His subordinate, ever the optimist, offered him a friendly grin and tried to calm him down. Boss, you know, these problems only seem huge because you've got such a big reputation. The more you push through stuff like this, the more your popularity is going to soar. Haeol nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. He knew he had to keep himself in check if he wanted to get back at those who looked down on him. His employee clapped him on the shoulder and promised, "One day, everyone will kneel before you." The subordinate continued, "And let's not forget, no one knows how to beat Kazarian like you do. That's your secret weapon." Grinning, the sycophant added, "Someday, people will remember you as the hero who cleared Kazarian with the smallest team in history." The association might even give you exclusive rights to Kazarian. Hey, Yol, never one to shy away from praise, agreed. Of course, nobody knows that beast like I do. Still, the guild isn't what it used to be. We've shrunk a lot since 3 years ago. But in his heart, he still believed he was the only one who could take down that monster bird. As the subordinate hyped him up even more, neither of them realized that their dreams and struggles were someone else's reality, playing out elsewhere in the city. Across town, someone was staring at a photo of Dojin clipped to a report. This was Kong Young-pyo, an S-rank hero with the Korean Hero Association and cousin to Kong Chulwo. He studied the photo, making sure he had the right guy. One of his subordinates confirmed it. A few months back, hero Kong Chulwo tried to get rid of him by tossing him into a gate. Young-pyo finished the sentence, but not only did he survive, he awakened in there, didn't he? The anxious subordinate nodded, continuing, the client was Hong Hee-ju, executive director of T Group, and, incidentally, the second daughter of W Group. Young-pyo frowned. Why would a wealthy Chaebol heiress target a nobody like this? The subordinate explained, apparently, Dojin is her illegitimate son from T Group. They took him in when he was 7, but after Hong Hee-ju had her own son 6 years ago, Dojin was kicked out. Young-pyo let out a short laugh. So much for family ties. Chaebols don't even care about blood, huh? He stood up, swinging his golf club idly. How much did Chulwo get paid for the job? 3 billion won, came the reply, which struck Young-pyo as suspiciously low. He scoffed, so the idiot Chulwo got wrecked anyway? The subordinate nodded, looking grim. He's a mess. His body's burned all over, he's completely blind, and barely hanging on. Young-pyo shrugged and lined up a mini-golf shot across his office. He sent the first ball cleanly into the hole, a predatory smile curling his lips. If it were me, I'd have chopped off his limbs and crushed his skull. No loose ends. His man kept going. There are rumors Hyun Juyin helped Dojin at the scene. That tidbit made Young-pyo miss his next shot. He spun around, eyes blazing. What possible reason would Juyin have to help that guy? What's their relationship? The subordinate stammered, I'm not sure, sir. But her testimony to the police got the whole case closed quickly. Young-pyo snapped, find out now. If there's nothing between them, then there must be a deal. Figure out exactly what it is. The subordinate bolted from the room, promising to get answers, and probably hoping to escape with his life. Young-pyo wasn't exactly known for keeping his temper in check. He clenched his fist around the golf club, snapped it in two, and hurled it to the ground. He figured it was only a matter of time before Hong Hee-ju came knocking, desperate to hire him for what Chulwo had failed to do. And with her background, she'd be bringing serious cash, which was already making him warm to the idea. Later that night, on the other side of city, Dojin was walking alone. He was reflecting that, just as he'd guessed, hunting inside the rift was far more efficient than clearing gates. Still, he'd need Juyin's help to keep getting in. He remembered what she'd said back in the rift. Once people started asking where she got her haul, the media would come after her day and night. So for now, she'd just keep everything quiet. She'd added, if it's fame you're after, I won't stop you. But Dojin had just handed her the bag and walked away. At the moment, he figured he'd have to find another way into the rift zone. But first, he was going to get some rest at the new house Huang Changsip had set up for him. When he approached the door, he was surprised to see a crowd of unfamiliar shoes lined up outside. Opening the door, he found Yunying waiting for him, her face anxious. She and their grandma were sitting in the living room, surrounded by a group of men in suits. Their boss, a man with a complete lack of tact, introduced himself as Prosecutor Park Chuliang from the Seoul District Prosecutor's Office. As Yunying ran over to hug her brother, the prosecutor looked at Dojin and asked, Do you know Mr. Huang Changsip? Dojin stared at him in silence, as if peering straight into the man's soul. The prosecutor pressed on, You're under arrest for aiding Huang Changsip, CEO of HCS Capital, in illegal high-interest loan shark operations. Early in the morning at the prosecutor's office, Dojin sat quietly behind the table, his hands cuffed to the chair as he calmly awaited whatever fate had in store for him. Outside the interrogation room, the prosecutor was striding alongside Director Lee, chatting about how both Huang Changsip and Dojin were being surprisingly compliant. The middle-aged prosecutor then thanked Lee for helping his daughter study abroad, asking him to pass along his regards to Director Hong, whoever that was. Once inside, he fixed his gaze on Dojin. You know, the whole reason I became a prosecutor was to get trash like you off the streets, he sneered. He slammed a fat stack of papers on the table, snatched up 2 sheets, and demanded, So, what the hell have you been up to all this time? He rattled off a list of charges, saying any one of them could get Dojin a 10-year sentence. They already had plenty of evidence, thanks to Changseep. Dojin's stony expression gave away only one thing. He regretted ever giving that Changseep bastard a second chance. The prosecutor barked at him to look up and not even think about lying. But Dojin, utterly unruffled, calmly said, "This is all Hong Heeju's doing, isn't it?" The prosecutor was momentarily thrown off, then pounded his fist on the table. Who the hell is that? Dojin figured by now that Huang Changseep's side had probably been crushed already. He'd kept his head down to avoid making a scene, but maybe it was time for a new approach. The prosecutor tried to intimidate him, warning that if Dojin thought Korean prosecutors were a joke, his life was about to be ruined. He punctuated it by calling him a bastard, and for the first time, a flicker of cold fury flashed in Dojin's eyes. The prosecutor actually flinched, backing away from the young man in cuffs. But he quickly tried to recover, cursing and raising his hand as if to slap Dojin. After all, what could go wrong? A tall, angry man versus a handcuffed kid in a locked room. But before he could follow through, another staff member knocked and asked him to step outside for a moment. There was some new information he needed to see. Moments later, the prosecutor's shout of disbelief echoed down the hallway. He glared at a fresh printout. The hero scanner claimed Dojin wasn't a hero at all, just an ordinary person. The prosecutor argued that it couldn't be right, even as his assistant hesitantly mentioned the info came from T Group. Suddenly, the prosecutor realized this nobody not only knew Hong Heeju's name, but might be much more important than he'd thought. Meanwhile, Dojin sat cuffed in the interrogation room, thinking about all the people who called Korean prosecutor scumbags. Maybe he should just wreck everything and run off with Grandma in Yunying. But before he could decide, the door opened and in walked a familiar face, Jian. She took one look at him and asked, "What are you doing here?" Dojin shrugged. "Honestly, I'm not even sure myself." Jian advised him not to do anything reckless. "I get that you're shocked, but using your abilities will only make things worse." He hesitated, not sure if she was really on his side. "Are you trying to help me?" Jian shook her head. "Not exactly. It's not about helping you. It's just that I know you haven't done anything wrong. If I didn't know the truth, I could ignore this, but now that I do, I can't just watch you get framed." Dojin almost smiled, thinking there might be more to her concern, but Jian cut him off to explain. The Hero Association is already planning an investigation. They're watching for unlicensed hero IDs and tracking the new rift that opened at your house in Mapo. Suddenly, Dojin's worry shifted to his family. "What about my grandma and Yunying? Are they safe?" That caught Jian off guard. She shot back. "What? Do you think I'm your secretary or something? I have my own life, you know." Still, she softened and admitted, "But yes, I checked. They're both fine. There's nothing to worry about." Dojin genuinely thanked her and promised to repay the favor. Jian blushed just a little. "Anyway, just hang in there. I'll get this sorted out as quickly as I can." Instead of directly proving Dojin's innocence, Hyun Jian took a smarter route. She exposed Prosecutor Park Chuliang's private library and his illegal lobbying activities, getting him removed from his post. After that, a proper investigation cleared Dojin of any connection to the incident. Even the charge of using an unlicensed hero ID only earned him a suspended sentence, thanks to Jian's persistent defense. Later, as they drove home, the car radio blared breaking news. A never-before-seen monster has appeared in the UK, attacking citizens. This mantis-like creature stands 1.5 meters tall, has 4 eyes, and can leap tremendous distances. "That's a Makashin," Dojin said offhandedly. Jian almost slammed on the brakes. "How do you know the name of that monster?" "The association just identified it." "Only we should know that." The truth was, monster names weren't just random. Mana stones carried not only energy but also information, so analyzing them revealed the monster's name and other details. On modern Earth, this was done through science. In his ruined world, it was done with magic. If a monster appeared in both worlds, odds were Dojin already knew it by name. Ignoring her question, Dojin kept going. "You can handle a Makashin easily with red fire and extract." Jian looked blank. "Red fire and what?" "They're harmless to humans," Dojin explained, "but for Makashins, it's a powerful paralytic. Just spray it on them and they'll be neutralized. No rampaging through the streets." Jian was so baffled, she couldn't help herself. "Okay, seriously, what are you?" Dojin fell silent, staring out the window as the car rolled on. Jian frowned at him and finally exploded. "Are you even listening to me?" He finally turned and, as if discussing the weather, brought up a completely different and distinctly unsettling subject. If I were to kill Hong Hee-ju, what do you think would happen? The woman sat in her office, nervously chewing her nails and trembling with fear. Her bodyguard stood in front of her, having just finished his report to Hong Hee-ju. She stammered, trying to ask why Hyun Jian was involved, but the answer she got only worsened the situation. The bodyguard admitted it wasn't exactly clear how Jian even knew Dojin, or what kind of relationship they might have. Still shaking, she pressed on, genuinely confused. She asked, almost pleadingly, how Dojin couldn't be a hero if he claimed he was awakened. Now it was the big guy's turn to get flustered. He started to stutter, explaining that perhaps Dojin had some special ability that could fool the hero detector, or maybe there was something else going on. Either way, the information he'd received was clearly off. The fear in Hong Hee-ju's eyes quickly shifted into rage. She began yelling, ordering her employee to contact Kang Young-pyo, not just to offer him 20 billion, but to up the ante to 30 billion. She insisted he tell Young-pyo to get started immediately. There was no more time to waste. Meanwhile, over in Young-pyo's office, he lounged comfortably in his chair, looking every bit the picture of relaxation. When his subordinate relayed the message, Young-pyo barely batted an eye, remarking that 30 billion simply wasn't enough. He told his employee to go back and ask for double. The poor subordinate, clearly overwhelmed, voiced his concerns about the amount. Young-pyo just shrugged, explaining how things worked around here. From Hong Hee-ju's perspective, he was her only option, and besides, once the job was done, 60 billion won wouldn't be an issue for someone like her. With Hyun Ji-yeon now involved, going up against an S-rank hero meant the price had to go up. The subordinate admitted, perhaps a bit too honestly, that Ji-yeon was a formidable opponent. That only seemed to irritate Young-pyo further, who slammed his foot on the floor in a way that left no doubt about who was in charge. After a tense pause, Young-pyo moved in closer and made it clear that not all S-ranks were created equal. He insisted he could take down someone like Jian in 20 minutes flat, and his subordinate quickly agreed, if only to keep breathing for another day. With a crooked grin, Young-pyo asked if the association had gotten back to them. The subordinate explained that they couldn't increase the payment any further, citing local UK regulations, and the association had already publicly stated they were carefully selecting which heroes to dispatch. Young-pyo rolled his eyes, grumbling that the association was making it hard for anyone to even claim the pay's too crap to go. He muttered about those association folks being the real deal and asked when they were supposed to leave. His assistant replied that their flight was in 3 days, scheduled as a joint transfer with the Japanese heroes. That news actually seemed to please Young-pyo. He'd been meaning to catch up with Takashi anyway. Young-pyo's thoughts drifted for a moment, wondering if that Makashin had any exploitable weaknesses. If he found one, his own value would skyrocket. But far away in Cambridge, UK, things were far from sunny or cheerful. The streets were in chaos as a giant, mantis-shaped monster fought off a squad of heroes, each one a celebrated champion in their own countries. Despite their credentials, they were no match for this formidable creature. As a monster swung its enormous claws, the ground shook. The heroes seized the moment, launching themselves over its neck. One managed to land a critical blow, sending the Makashin tumbling from the sky. Exhausted and covered in dirt, the heroes gathered around the body, but their relief was short-lived. More monsters began to appear, launching new attacks. The question hung in the air, would any of these heroes even make it to sea the next day? The UK heroes were throwing everything they had at the monsters, trying desperately to block their southward advance. Lacking clear intelligence about their enemy, though, they were fighting blind. As the Cambridge defense line collapsed, London, less than 60 kilometers away, was now under threat, the monsters closing in with clockwork precision, ready for their next feast. Then out of nowhere, brilliant fiery objects shot down from above. When they hit the monsters, the creatures fell unconscious almost instantly, collapsing one after another in a chain reaction of defeat. Inside a helicopter hovering above the scene, a group of heroes, including Ji-yeon, watched in disbelief. Someone remarked that Miss Hyun Ji-yeon had been right. The red flower ant extract actually worked. The Makashin hadn't stood a chance. Her insight was nothing short of amazing. But while the other heroes were quietly awestruck, Kang Young-pyo remained suspicious. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something fishy about the whole thing. No way was Ju-yeon that skilled, he thought. As the team listened to her instructions to go and finish the job, they leaped from the helicopter, descending into the chaos below. The next day, at Seoul's airport, a crowd of journalists and reporters gathered, all eagerly awaiting the return of the special hero, Hyun Juyeon. The buzz was palpable. She was, by all accounts, the MVP of the UK mission. Someone commented that she discovered the Makashin's weakness and saved the UK from utter despair. There were even rumors the British royal family would knight her for her efforts. She arrived with poise, greeted by a flurry of camera flashes, which, incidentally, did nothing to improve Youngpyo's mood as he trailed behind her. The reporters pressed her for answers, asking how she'd uncovered the monster's weakness, a question she didn't seem eager to answer. They didn't overlook Youngpyo, either. It was as if he, too, had become a moral champion, given his reputation for hunting the most Makashins during the expedition. The main television news anchor began his broadcast, recounting everything from the red flower ant spray to the heroic exploits, as people stopped in the streets to watch on giant screens mounted on city buildings. Among the onlookers was a man in a hoodie, watching silently. This was Dojin, the true hero of the day. But at that moment, all he could think about was his intense dislike of the ever-arrogant Kang Youngpyo. Inside an elegant and classic restaurant in the heart of city, a few gift bags rested on the polished table. They were clearly intended for Dojin, who was quietly sipping his coffee, while Jin explained that one was for Yunying and Grandma, and another was for him. Dojin reached for his bag and began to unwrap it, though Jin made no effort to pressure him into opening it there. From the looks of it, he remarked, it seemed to be an expensive outfit in warm, inviting colors. Jin merely took a sip of her coffee and explained that it was a token of gratitude for everything he had done for her. She said that, thanks to him, she had even been able to call herself a hero now. She added, almost with a shrug, that compared to the help she'd received, this gift was modest, and if he ever needed a car too, she'd be happy to arrange it. Dojin replied that he'd let her know if it came to that. After all, he'd benefited as well. Jin, sounding a bit resigned, acknowledged that even if she asked how he'd figured out Makashin's weakness, she doubted he would answer. He simply questioned whether he had any reason to tell her. She let the subject go, thinking that talking to him sometimes felt more like dealing with a stubborn child than a grown man. Changing the topic, Jin asked him about his plans going forward. She admitted she wasn't expecting an answer about world peace, but warned that if he was thinking of targeting people like Hong Hee-ju or Kang Youngpyo, things could escalate quickly, and they would need to put a stop to it. But, ever unpredictable, Dojin simply said that his first priority was to buy a house, which left her momentarily speechless. She wondered aloud if he was just renting the place he lived in now, but his only response was a laugh, leaving her even more confused. On the other, unknown side of the city, a lively party was underway, complete with music, laughter, and all kinds of entertainment. At the center of it all was Youngpyo, surrounded by admirers. Even as he enjoyed the festivities, he couldn't help but reflect on how subtly different Hyunjin seemed lately. He found himself wondering how she had known about Makashin's weakness, and why she kept the source of that knowledge to herself. He recalled their flight home from the UK, when he had told her to forget about Makashin for now and instead explain what was going on with Dojin. After all, she'd gone so far as to confront a prosecutor just to get him released, and she'd been present when Dojin brought down Cheol-woo. Jiyeon had glanced at him and pointed out that Kang Cheol-woo had started the whole mess, reminding Youngpyo that the gate contract killing had failed, and that even on the day of the confrontation, Kang Cheol-woo had been the one to pick the fight. Youngpyo had laughed nervously, conceding that Cheol-woo had done some foolish things for pocket change, and that it wouldn't have been a shock if he'd gotten himself killed. Leaning in a little closer, he'd acknowledged that Cheol-woo was his cousin, as Jin surely already knew. The implication was clear. He now had a reason to take revenge on Dojin. The room seemed to grow tense at that word. But Jiyeon had simply turned away, closed her eyes, and told him to do whatever he wanted. She wasn't getting involved. Her response left Youngpyo wondering if perhaps they weren't as close as he'd thought. She added, almost as an afterthought, that there was no reason for her to step in either way. Even back at the party, Youngpyo found himself mulling over her words. What did she mean by saying she didn't need to step in? Pouring himself a glass of wine, he concluded that this Dojin character was definitely hiding something. Meanwhile, across the sea in Long Sutton, England, at a place known as the Shrubbery, the devastation left by the latest monster wave was all too obvious. The UK Hero Association was scrambling to collect as many mana stones as possible before the expected second wave hit. They were sending in teams of heroes in an attempt to secure the rift. Two guard heroes were chatting as they kept watch. One remarked that it was a shame they didn't have any red flower and extract. If they did, even derankers like them might have been able to take down McCashin. His companion agreed, saying that if only the first wave had been stopped, the mana stones would have been a gold mine. Of course, everyone knew that a rift which experienced a wave couldn't be converted into a gate. One of them mentioned hearing that the monster in the second wave wouldn't be McCashin, and his friend admitted that was a scary thought, especially since some countries have been wiped out by unknown threats before. Just then, the first guard glanced toward the rift. He thought he'd heard something, maybe someone coming out. His friend wondered aloud if the earlier raid party was already returning, even though it had only been 5 hours. He told himself to stop imagining things and focus on keeping civilians away from the mana stones. Suddenly, a sharp, cracking sound from inside the rift drew their attention. High above, a dark, man-shaped figure emerged, its eyes opening wide and menacing as it looked down on the world. The guards immediately realized that this was no hero. The creature's tattered clothes and scars said it all. But before they could even radio headquarters, the monster calmly raised a hand and released small green circles of light, which surrounded the two heroes and lifted them off the ground. One of them managed to draw his daggers and, despite spinning helplessly, hurled them at the intruder. The blades were effortlessly deflected by another aura of green light. The scar-faced monster commented, almost lazily, that they were simply too weak. With a wave of his hand, he conjured a warm green energy around his fist, causing the D-Rankers' own uniforms to choke them. The monster moved with eerie serenity, bringing doom to the city in a single gesture. He sliced a massive street sign in half, a sign that flashed the number 19.26%, and mused aloud that it had been 10 years in this world's time, but he hadn't even reached 20%. He wondered if it was all just a failure, despite everything he'd done to create the dimensional rift. Still, he decided his next step was to increase the mana concentration. But when a half-conscious guard asked who he was, the monster paused, reconsidered, and declared that it was time for a change of plans. He ripped the guard apart with a flick of his power, and decided that before anything else, he needed to wipe out the weakest bugs first.